Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. I'm not going to be a location chauvinist. I'm going to say either this morning, this evening, wherever you find yourself in the world. As I've pointed out on more than one occasion, if you are under the sound of this voice, you have my appreciation for being so. And I thank you for being here. I want to give a shout out to the chat. I don't necessarily always do that at the beginning of the show, but I've pointed out on more than one occasion, you can't necessarily have a show without you. And you guys are the ones that makes the show keep ticking along. If you guys find yourself digging this content, you find yourself coming back to this particular location often, like this video, share this video. You can support this content, of course, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat. When I get to a location where I can get mail, I am going to wear my new t-shirts. And if you guys enjoy those t-shirts, you can get those t-shirts. I'm going to have to get a vendor for them. But my mom seems to like them. They effectively were mailed to her. She loved it. I designed these like a month or so ago. And so I think you'll like them. But that's it. Let's get to the news. There is a lot of news that is taking place. What is that? Oh, that's the thing. That's the blink. That's the sofa. There's a lot of news that's taking place. And we have some damn good guests for the show today to cover it. We have Jerry Gray. He's going to be here at 7:15. We have David Hundeyin. Yeah, Hundeyin. The name, in my head, I want to say something else, which is why I always have to pause a bit to make sure that I'm getting the name correct. But David Hundeyin, he's going to be here at 8 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, we're going to have Col Lawrence Wilkerson. So we are going to have a damn good show for you today. And I guess there are a few big points of news. One, as I pointed out yesterday, there was the interesting story about Benin. Now, Benin, West Africa, there was a coup attempt in order to try to overthrow that government. That coup attempt, from my understanding, failed, even though there's some media that is reporting something slightly different. I'll just say it that way. But nevertheless, we're going to go with the assessment that that coup has failed. On top of that, you get Nigeria that turns around and attacks Benin. ECOWAS apparently deploys forces. And obviously, this is Hundeyin. Yeah, Hundeyin. This is obviously them drawing a red line under this idea of these governments falling. Now, the operative question is, why on earth are the people so annoyed and pissed off with your government that those governments keep falling, right? But nevertheless, they seem to have drawn a red line under this idea of these governments collapsing and these governments continuing to fall. Now, David is probably going to have a perspective that is somewhat different than many of the people in mainstream media's take on this, because in the way mainstream media looks at this, they look at this as, oh my God, this is horrible. This is outrageous. How do these governments keep falling? How do these governments keep collapsing? I think David's point of view is going to be authoritarian nationalism is what is required to get Africa to, let's say, to retake sovereignty on the continent of Africa. And what many of these states are seeing is what is taking place in the Sahel states. And they're trying to replicate that formula that is happening in the Sahel states. Basically, these countries taking their sovereignty at the barrel of a gun. One of the other interesting stories to that, though, there's been a new development on that. So I want to pull the map up just so you can see how wild this is. So, Nigeria launched airstrikes against Benin. Okay. Now, I want to show you, okay, right here. Perfect. All right. So this is, oh, why is this so, why can't I get rid of this? Okay. Take a look at this. This is Benin, this is Nigeria. Nigeria borders Benin. Nevertheless, a Nigerian aircraft gets down to Burkina Faso. How does that work? How do you make the argument, well, we were doing bombings in Benin, but we ended up in Burkina Faso? How does that work? Interesting, right? So you have Nigerian pilots who are effectively held hostage in Burkina Faso because they were effectively bombing in ostensibly in Benin, but somehow ended up in Burkina Faso. And obviously, Burkina Faso is looking at this as like, this is nonsense. This is complete nonsense. But my man is here. I see him in the background. I want to go to him. Jerry, how you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
No, man. Thank you for joining me.
Back.
Jerry Gray. He's host of Jerry Takes on China. He's lived in China for more than 30 years at this point, traveled more than 30,000 kilometers.
21.
And
21.
21 years. I'm sorry. For some reason, I thought it was 30 years. Maybe, okay. Maybe it's 30 kilometers that I'm mixing up.
But 40,000 kilometers.
That's what it is. Okay. Jerry Gray is host of Jerry's Take on China. He's lived in China for more than 21 years and has traveled more than 40,000 kilometers on bike across the country. Jerry, people will be hard-pressed to do that in their own country, let alone doing it in China.
Well, in fairness, most countries aren't big enough to do it, but yeah, that's true.
True. That's fair also. Jerry, I would, right now, apparently Macron was in China for 3 days.
Yeah.
He says all the right things when he's in China. He comes out and immediately attacks China, talking about trade disparity and everything else. There's a German official that is apparently in China also. Yes. What is going on with this? China seems to be trying to make inroads into Europe. Do you think they're going to be successful on this?
I think it's the other way around. I think Europe is realizing that China is absolutely essential to their survival. And I'm not talking about just their economic survival. I'm talking about European survival. The European Union is in danger of breaking down, breaking up, whatever you want to describe it. I don't see that China is chasing Europe. Their trade figures came out just today for November, and they are hugely in favor of the export has gone up. China has, for the first time in history, been a country that has in 1 year achieved a target of achieved $1 trillion in export surplus. So, and that's November. We still have another month to go. So they haven't just beaten the record, they have blitzed the record. They did $110 billion surplus. This is not their trade, this is their surplus for the month. So China is doing more than it's ever done in the past, but it's not doing it to Europe in the same numbers. And the numbers to America have declined dramatically. So what's happening now? Americans are still getting Chinese products. They're just paying more for them through middlemen. They're buying them from Mexico or Thailand or Vietnam or somewhere else. But China has exported more this year than any year in history, and it's exported it at higher profitability, at better prices. So China's doing okay. So we had Macron here. We've got the German trade minister here. But interestingly, he's not meeting top level. Wang Yi hasn't met him. He hasn't met Xi Jinping, whereas Macron did, of course, president to president. And I think Macron immediately went back and kind of followed the line and say, we've got to rein China's trading in. It's too big a deal. They're making too much money. I don't think China would argue that. I think they're quite cognizant of the fact that they're making damn good money over the rest of the world. But the fact is, they do have two kind of challenges to take up, and one of that is domestic spending, and one of that is domestic saving. They need to get more people to spend money inside of China. We're all saving far too much. It's quite common to meet ordinary people who have $500,000 RMB in their bank account. Now, if you say to someone who earns $4,000 a month in America, could you get $500,000 in your bank account? They'd say, not a chance, it's not going to happen. But if you say to someone who earns 4,000 RMB in China, by the time they're my age, they've got 500,000 RMB in their bank account. So it's relative. They might earn a lot less money, but they're saving more. They're buying whatever they need. The number of cars in China, 87% of the cars manufactured in China are sold in China. This is not an overcapacity. This is filling the gap of where these people are coming from. Because 20 years ago when I came here, hardly anybody had a car. Now most families have got at least one, some have got two. I know families with 3 or 4 cars. When I was a kid growing up in the UK, when I turned 17, I got my first car. This was normal in the UK. When I came to China, if I met a 17-year-old with a car, I'd say, how the hell did that happen? These kids didn't have cars, and their parents might have had one in the family. Now there's 4 or 5 cars in the family. So this is what's happened. China isn't overcapacity at all. It's only exporting 13% of its cars, and cars are a massive part of that export dollar. That's how many cars it's making. It's keeping 83% here, exporting 17%, and it's a massive, it's 83-17 or 87-13, I can't remember. But it's a massive amount of the cars being made here are sold here. And also, Germany knows this. There's a huge sales for Porsche, Mercedes, Audi, Volkswagen. They're all huge here in China. Many people love German cars. So Germany wants to be here, and it knows it needs to be here. And then, of course, you've got this situation where Germans now in Germany are unable to build cars because they can't finish them because there aren't enough next period chips available for those cars. So Germany has some very serious problems. France has some serious problems. And China is aware of that. But it's not going to stop exporting to third world countries just because the European Union say, we don't want to take this. They're not taking stuff from China. They're sanctioning stuff. They're tariffing stuff. They're not really taking the products that China is manufacturing. So China has diversified its markets. And now you've got, and I heard you talking about Burkina Faso, now you've got France trying to buy things from Africa, and Africa are buying them from China to sell to France. That's how it works. If the European Union don't want to buy it from China, China will sell it to someone else. Now, of course, that hurt. Now, had none of these tariffs and none of these sanctions ever occurred, everybody in the world would be growing. But they're not. All of this protectionism, it didn't benefit China. China had to work extremely hard to find alternate markets for its products, and it's done so, and it's got alternate markets. And people say, oh yeah, they're killing the prices and they're selling things at a loss. No, they're not, because profitability is up too. If profitability is up, companies are not going broke. Simple as that.
Yeah, effectively, not only are they selling and finding new markets to sell those products, they're actually making decent money on the products to which they're selling.
They're also making a decent product.
And a decent product.
These Chinese cars are like, wow, that's only $70,000. That's a Rolls Royce. They're selling equivalents of Rolls Royce for $70,000-$80,000. They may cost 500,000 RMB, but not everyone can afford them. But if you want to get into the Huawei Matrix, I think it's called, this is better than a Rolls Royce. This is a superb car, and it's $75,000 at the entry level. What's the Rolls Royce cost at the entry level? I don't know. It's probably not $75,000.
It's more expensive. Yeah, it's way more expensive than 70K. There was a scene that got very much publicity where Xi Jinping turns to Macron and says something like, I'm paraphrasing, but effectively, hey, join us in the multipolar world. And people were interpreting it as him effectively saying, the control that the United States effectively has over Europe, lessen that, work with us. Basically, Europeans should necessarily be the ones that are on the outs in this kind of new forming world.
I think Europeans are starting to learn this. Now, I follow China. I'm not a geopolitical analyst or anything like that. I follow what China is doing. And I see China is doing very, very well. internally, domestically, it's doing very well. I see it doing well in different markets as well because I've traveled to some third world countries. I was in Laos earlier this year. I was in Sri Lanka late last year. So I've traveled to some third world countries that are doing great business with China, and you can see the benefits that China is bringing to those countries. I can't see any benefit that China is bringing to Europe now, not because China doesn't want to. China's quite willing to, but Europe are not willing to accept it. Now, why are Europe not willing to accept it is the big question. You know, they had their Nord Stream, they had their cheap gas coming from Russia. Then they had that cheap gas coming via India from Russia. Then you've got Americans telling them they can't do that, they can't do that. They have to. Now, Americans are still buying what they need from Russia, but they're not allowing Europe to buy what they need from Russia to keep their costs down. And you're seeing Volkswagen letting people off. You're seeing Mercedes unable to build cars. You're seeing all of these companies, huge companies, doing better in China. BASF, huge German company, it's massive here in Guangdong. Hundreds of billions of dollars of investments here. And they're making a lot of money doing products, chemicals and plastics and the things that BASF makes, being made here rather than being made in Germany. There is a very definite need for Germany, German, French, the two biggest European countries, and Spain. Spain is already talking to China quite happily. Macron came over here very happily, but then went back and immediately met with Zelensky and Starmer and the critical of China. It does seem to me that really what it needs is somebody inside of the French, somebody inside of the European Union to just have a word in the ears of the leaders of those countries and say, what the hell are you doing? Why are you destroying your economy to protect the Americans, who have made it very clear that they are going to protect their Western Hemisphere and they're going to support you, but they want you to pick up the tab for it. So everything America is doing is for America first. They're certainly not going to desert Europe, and they're not going to desert Australia, but they're going to make Europe and Australia and Japan and South Korea pay more for the protection that they offer. I mean, this is a mafia game going on here. You know, if you don't do this, and in fact, somebody was in Richard Marles, the defense minister. There's an OSMIN conference going on yesterday, today. And this is the Australian minister and US ministers of defense secretaries getting together. And they're basically saying, Richard Marles, the defense secretary, or defense minister, has actually come out and said, Australia has, since the beginning of this government, been poised to increase America's foothold in Australia. So America are building their foothold. They're putting air bases in, they're putting military bases in, they're putting more troops in, they're bringing submarines across. And guess who's paying for this? 27 million Australian taxpayers are paying $368 billion at today's prices. Many estimates believe this will be as much as $1 trillion by the time this is done. And this is a country that only has 27 million people. Why would you be paying $368 billion for protection from America? You're probably better off being invaded and overrun by Japanese, which is more likely to happen than Chinese.
Jerry, they're asking if you can increase the volume. They're saying that they're having a difficult time hearing you.
I don't know if I can increase the volume. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay.
New headset. I'll just move the microphone nearer my mouth. Looking at the settings, audio. My microphone is on full. How's that? Yeah, I got a tiny little bit more volume. I was like that far from the top. I hope
you're
it's
perfectly
better.
okay. No, you're perfectly fine. We'll make it work. Trump has come out with a new national security strategy.
Yes.
And I am very curious on what they're saying about this in Beijing. I mean, for all intents and purposes, people are talking about it as retrenchment for America. China has been devolved in many respects to somewhat of a near peer, if not peer competitor in the way that the document looks at it. It wants everyone else to foot the bill. Kind of like the Romans say, we're going to get the Gauls and barbarians to fight for us. We're overextended. We need to pull back on this kind of overextension. And so we need Australia, South Korea, Philippines, Europe, et cetera, to effectively be the tip of the spear, and we will work from behind the scenes, that type of thing. Russia has been crowing about this because from their point of view, they consider this to be favorable. I would imagine China may also consider this to be favorable.
It's not favorable at all. Media in Russia
No.
might be crowing for this, but the government is not. Putin will be just saying, well, yeah, we've heard all this before. Basically, what we're talking about here is a White House strategy. We're not talking. I'll just move my thing there so you get a little bit less of the back screen. A White House strategy, not the Defense Department strategy. Now, of course, the White House dictates what the policy will be, but in a few months' time, we'll see how this comes out in a Department of Defense paper. China is not, as far as I'm aware, China is not at any stage saying this is good for China. They know that Taiwan will pick up more of the tab, Japan will pick up more of the tab, the Philippines will pick up. Basically what's happening, if we can use a business analogy, the government of America has decided that it is going to subcontract its strategy in Asia and what they call the Indo-Pacific. Now they're going to subcontract that to other countries and make those other countries pick up the tab. That is really all we have going on here, nothing more. I can't see any benefit from what I read. It's 33 pages. I have read it. Not only have I read it, I've read analyses by several different people, including the one that my go-to guy for things like this is Brian Boletic, New Atlas. And I think if you read Brian's stuff, you get it spot on. They have not changed their policy. They have merely changed the wording of the policy so that they're not footing the bill. They're subcontracting their strategy out to other players. And Australia has seemed to have taken this on board happily. The people of Australia, not so. The government of Australia seems to have absorbed this. And I'm not talking about the current government. The previous government did too. So the previous government signed on to accepted AUKUS. The current government signed on to it. And it seems to me that it's likely we're going to have a change, I think, in the opposition. And if what I think happens to the Australian opposition, a guy called Andrew Hastie will become the opposition leader. And if Andrew Hastie becomes the opposition leader, we're going to have an even bigger anti-China hawk. And it's going to get very nasty. So we've got the Philippines getting very, very nasty. We've got Japan with the radar lock-on thing, and that's another story we could get into if you want. We've got South Korea, not quite so vocal about it, but there are Western-paid protests in South Korea to get the CCP out. I don't know where this comes from, because as far as I'm aware, there's absolutely no influence, CCP influence or otherwise, from China. The only thing that goes across to South Korea are tourists. Get them out if you want to, but that'll just hurt your economy. I don't see any kind of Western Chinese influence in South Korea. There's a lot of Japanese influence in Taiwan, a lot, much more than I thought, actually. And that's come through to me more recently because I made a video about that. But that's been hugely widely accepted here in China. I've actually had my first multi-million view video. Unfortunately, it's not on my platform, so I get no monetization from it. But what the heck? I was picked up by China Daily, Xinhua, CGTN, Global Times. All of them picked me up, and several people have taken my video. They've removed my logo, put Chinese subtitles on it, and presented me as a kind of an interview to their questions. And it's okay. I don't care. It gets the message across. And I've literally had several million views on one video I did about Japan, or particularly one aspect of the video. So I think America have made absolutely no changes to their strategy or their policies. What they have done is just subcontracted them. That's the best analogy I can come up with. They're saying, well, we're going to do this. We are going to maintain primacy. We're going to maintain hegemony. We're going to maintain power bases, but you're going to do the work for us. That's how they're managing this. I don't see this as any kind of a pivot away from China. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but I don't think I am.
Yes, empire on the cheap, effectively. It's like we're spending too much money. We're $37 trillion in debt. This is too expensive. So we need
You
other
know,
people to foot the bill.
just to service their debt, they're going another $1 trillion into further debt. It's happening every 100 days or so. So we're going to be $40 trillion soon.
Yeah. Yeah, this is pretty outrageous. I mean, that was my take on it also. And that is, when you read through the document, there are parts in the document that effectively is like, we need other countries effectively to stand up in their particular regions.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who are analyzing it was just kind of looking at, we're pulling back from Russia, we're pulling back from China, we're pulling back from this, we're pulling back from that, missing various parts of that document that very clearly state we need these countries to stand up.
I think that's the problem that we all face when we're analyzing something. We look at a document and we see what we want to see and we disregard the rest. You know that old song, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. Perfect line from a perfect song. And that is what's happening when we do this. And again, I say Brian Broletic is one of my go-to guys, probably my number one go-to guy. There's a couple of others. Nuri Vatachi in Hong Kong is another of my go-to guys. I go and see what these guys are saying. I form my own opinions and I go and see what these guys are saying. Invariably, they not only support my opinion, but they give me more detail into it. These are guys who really do understand. And I think it was Brian who made the point that so many people are cherry picking what they want to see. And yeah, if you cherry pick these out, yes, you can make a case for it. And this is exactly how all of the anti-China narratives work. You cherry pick one piece of information, then you form an opinion, and then you write your op-eds about it, that opinion based on one cherry-picked piece of information, and people start believing you. And it makes sense, but it's not real, because the people who have actually read or experienced something about the truth will say, no, that's not right. That part, yeah, there's always a tiny, I call it the smidgen of truth, the 2%, the kernel of truth, if you want to call it, whatever name you want to give it. There is a tiny element of truth in what they say, but then they've misinterpreted the whole thing because of that one statement. America has said that they want to pivot back to the Western Hemisphere, but really what they want to do is to control, they want to control Colombia, they want to control Bolivia, they want to control Venezuela, which is a huge thing at the moment. They're going to control Panama, they're going to do all these different things in their own backyard, but that's not going to take anything away from what they're doing. The moment, and you know, this has been going on for a few months now, when Elbridge Colby wrote his piece of paper that basically said we're going to pivot back to the Western Hemisphere, and there was a little bit of a dispute in the China watcher circles, and some people said, yeah, this is good, which it would be if it was true. Some people said this is not true, because until they start to remove troops and equipment from that area, there is no going back. So here's what they're doing. They're not saying we're going to remove troops from Okinawa. We're not going to remove troops from Guam. We're not going to remove troops from South Korea. We're just going to ask you to pay more to keep them there. And if those countries say we don't want to keep them there, then they get more impositions from America. This is more, if you don't, you know what the consequences will be. This is the way that the mafia works. This is how a mafia insurance system goes. You don't pay more, you can expect some problems. And South Korea is getting problems right now because they're getting these anti-China protests, which are not organic, for sure. Japan has got a lot of Takaichi's comments protests, and they are organic. But what is not organic is the anti-China stuff from Japan. Now, what China has done, this is really interesting. China has reopened the Okinawa or Ryukyu conversation and said, you know, we recognize these as a separate entity, not part of China. Not part of Japan. And that's a really interesting aspect.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they've just reopened that. I mean, I'm not saying this is going to be Japan's Taiwan, where the way that China is now handling this and saying, you know, this has never really been resolved. You know, at the end of the war, the Potsdam and Cairo declarations, they both said that Ryukyu would be an independent place. And then America took it over, and Okinawa is Japanese name for it, and then they put their troops on it and occupied the region. And consequently, Japan has held on to it, but only as a kind of proxy because the Americans control it. American police patrol the streets. Military police patrol the streets. It's not a good sign. It's not a good thing for the locals either. And a lot of them are now saying, well, I identify as Chinese. So it's going
Do
to
they?
pop up. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot on This is one of the reasons why Xiao Hongshu has just been banned in Taiwan, because it's full of Ryukyuans saying, I identify as Chinese now.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Let's get into the Japan thing for a bit, because look, I agree with you on the retrenchment thing. I think the idea that this ship, this 5,000-pound gorilla, is going to be turned immediately on the dime, because the White House pens a policy document that doesn't even say it's pulling back from the world, but gives certain cues. For one, even if Trump did say that in the document, Congress, Blob, Europe, none of these places will be okay with him doing that. Like, meaning you are trying to pull a machine that has been going in a particular direction for decades, and you're trying to turn that machine on a dime, which I don't believe that you're going to be able to do. What happens for the next presidency, right? Even if this was the case. And
this is why you have Congress, because Congress has signed into law something called the Taiwan Relations Act. And the Taiwan Relations Act overrides presidential decrees. Now, the president can only make a decree, an executive order, if he has a view that there is a national security risk. Now, of course, America has no national security risk by China taking over Taiwan. It has an economic risk, and he would describe that as a national security risk. When I say China taking over Taiwan, this is their wording, not mine. Taiwan is part of China. That's their wording, not mine. And the United Nations recognizes Taiwan as a province of China. And we can argue all we like about who recognizes this, who recognizes that, but 3 consecutive presidents have said Taiwan is part of China. We recognize there is one China, and Beijing is the capital of it. And all of that is overridden by the Taiwan Relations Act. So it doesn't really matter what the president says. The president can come in and say whatever the hell he likes, and unless he can get Congress to change laws, it doesn't matter, because America will do what America does. And the democratically elected Congress, the Senate, the House, they will make the laws, not the president. The president can change laws, but only temporarily. He can't override laws, and he can't cancel laws. He can sign things into law, but he can't sign them out of law without congressional approval. So consequently, the Taiwan Relations Act still exists. They're going to send all the weaponry that Taiwan can afford to buy. They're not going to donate or gift any to Taiwan now. They're just going to say, well, Taiwan has to buck up and pay up. So that's how that's going to change. You wanted to talk about Japan, sorry.
Yeah, what do you make of the China-Japan thing? I've been fascinated by that. It's so bizarre to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you talking particularly about, what, are we talking
The
about
Prime Minister,
Takahachi's comments?
Takaichi,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
I mean, well, I guess there are 2 points. There's Takaichi comments. These expanded into China being very upset, to put it mildly. China telling people not to go to Japan. There's that. And then recently you had where China is saying that I guess China was doing military exercises. And Japan is saying that China locked on to targets.
Yeah.
Again, this is what Japan is saying.
Yeah, all this is true. There's no question about that. I mean, this is true. I believe it's true, and I can only go by what I've seen in media and on social media. So let's roll this back a little bit. Takaichi made these comments, but she made these comments in contradiction to the 1971 agreement that Japan and China signed. They both signed an agreement. Now, in the agreement, China said Taiwan is part of China, and in the same agreement, the next paragraph, or same paragraph, Japan recognized and respected or acknowledged, some wording like that, but didn't say we agree Taiwan is part of China. So there is that little blurring of the edges to make it seem we can argue this later on. That's one thing. But then the next thing is, it did say in the same paragraph that matters between China and Taiwan are internal and Japan will not interfere. That's clear. That's in the document. So despite the fact that they weren't particularly clear on accepting Taiwan as part of China or respecting China's statement that Taiwan is part of China, which I accept that there's in a legal aspect you could argue that Japan has never accepted Taiwan as part of China. Okay, I'll accept that. Legally, you could interpret it that way. I don't agree with it, but you could interpret it that way. Now, the next thing is that do Japan have the right to interfere in anything that goes on between China and Taiwan? And the answer is no. Nobody in the world, not even the Taiwanese, recognize themselves as a separate country. There is anybody who has any formal education, any knowledge of this, who says Taiwan's a country. It's not. It's a region, it's a province of China, it's a separately administered province of China, but it is a province of China, in the same way that Hainan Island is a province of China, Hong Kong is a province or region of China. These things are indisputable. And Japan's 1971 agreement, or 72, I can't remember now, but 71 or 72 agreement actually unequivocally states this: they will not interfere in China and Taiwan's internal affairs. So they are now recognizing that this is an internal affair. In 2015, because Japan has a pacifist constitution, they needed to change this, but they can't change the constitution without going to a referendum, and that's hugely expensive, it's time-consuming, and it might not get the result they wanted. So Shinzo Abe created a law that says if there is a existential crisis, I'm not sure of the exact wording because it's Japanese and it's been translated into English, but let's say a life-threatening crisis for Japan, they are able, under this law, to override the constitution and attack the country involved in self-defense, even if that country hasn't attacked them. And the wording of that is exactly the same wording that Takaichi used when she made that statement. So consequently, this is why China is so angry. It's gone against the 1970s agreement. It's supporting what Shinzo Abe, who was her mentor many years ago and got her into parliament, the Diet, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but got her into the parliament, and now she's the prime minister, and now she's using exactly the same words to say, well, if China were to invade Taiwan, we would see that as an existential threat, so we would militarily get involved because we can, according to this 2015 law. That is why China is so upset about this. Then we had China going out with something like 100 ships, and including the Liaoning aircraft carrier, going out into legitimately and legally and advisedly telling people what they were doing, going out to international waters to conduct deep-sea operations, deep-sea exercises. Now, you could argue all you like that this is kind of threatening, but this is what America has been doing for 70 years. This is what Japan does, including in the Taiwan Strait. Japan sends ships into the Taiwan Strait. So does Britain, so does Germany, so does France, so does Australia. They all send ships to China, but when China sends ships out, they go, oh, you can't do that. Well, ultimately, they can. They're absolutely acting within the law. So they've told Japan, we're in international waters, we're not going to bother you, we're just showing you what we can do. Now, you could argue all you like that this is threatening, but the fact is it's perfectly legal and legitimate. They're conforming with all international laws. And they have advised Japan what they're doing, so they've conformed with every aspect of it. Now they're launching planes off the Liaoning, which is an aircraft carrier, and that's all part of exercises. And so what's wrong with that? Every country in the world does exercises. They do them in international waters. So Japan has now sent its two, I think they were F-35s, out to have a look. And they're saying, no, go away. You can't come and have a look at this. This is not your business. We're in international waters. We're not harming you. We're not threatening you. We're in international waters. And if you come closer, we will lock on our radars. Now, what they can then do, there's escalations. The first escalation, you lock on the radar. The second escalation is you fire flares in front of them. And the third escalation is if they get too close and they're still threatening, then you shoot them down. And that is perfectly legitimate under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. That's what they're doing. So they locked on radars, and the Japanese pilots must have pissed their pants and said, I'm getting back to base, because these guys would have never had a radar lock-on before. It's very common for military jets, fighter jets, to lock on. Apparently, and I've been looking at this today, apparently the US military do it all the time to civilian aircraft, just for practice. They go out and they practice on locking onto civilian aircraft. So if a 737 is flying across the Pacific and suddenly it's all lit up and painted with radar, now that would come up on their screen. Someone's just lit you up. That happens a lot. This is just, it's a normal part of training for fighter pilots. But what's happening here is slightly different, because they're in international waters, they're entitled to be in international waters. They have advised the countries that are nearby this is what they're doing, and those countries are sending planes to have a look. And as those planes get closer, they become a threat. So the first step, light them up. Say, okay, you come closer, we're going to light you up. Bing, you light them up, and they go, oh shit, turn around and go back. If they don't turn around, what you then do is you fly past them and you drop flares. And if they still don't turn around and they're getting close, dangerously close, you can, under United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea and under the aviation laws, you can shoot these fellows down, because they're in international waters doing what they're entitled to do. You may argue all you like that it's threatening, but it's perfectly within their legal rights to do it. Media Unlocked, who are a couple of very young journalists that I like here in China, they're in Beijing, they have made a very good short video about this, two young journalists, and they work for China Daily. They're called Media Unlocked on X and on YouTube. And they've done a couple of good things and explained exactly what's happened. And they've got the receipts. China has told Japan what it's doing. There's nothing wrong with what they're doing.
Do you think, where do you fall on this question of whether or not Japan is acting on its own steam? There's one thought. Well, see, there are two thoughts on this. One thought is that because America is trying to maintain some kind of diplomatic relations with China currently, that Japan is feeling like Europe, like daddy is leaving. And so we need to make a huge amount of noise in order to get daddy to come back and pay attention to us. Basically, it seems that the United States on some level is pulling back. And I know from the argument that they're pushing these other countries forward, but these other countries don't necessarily want to foot the tab. They don't like this kind of, let's say, reorganization of the war for rights doctrine. Yeah. And so they are panicking. And part of the panic is what Japan is doing, or what Europe is doing in regards to trying to maintain the war in Ukraine. Where do you fall on this? Is this Japan acting on its own, or is this Japan in a cry for help? Which one? Which one?
I get why you say that, because what's really interesting is how America has not helped at all. Japan is crying for help, and America.
Trump has been very quiet.
Yeah, you did it, not us. It's your problem. So there's that, and what that is I mean, in the public forum. Now, don't forget what we see on X, what we see on Facebook, what we see on YouTube, other social medias, is opinions from people. We don't see the reality. When the White House comes out and gives you a statement, then you know that what the White House is thinking. Trump has not made any statements on this. So my guess, because it is an opinion, is that inside of the Pentagon, you've got a lot of hawks and you've got a lot of doves. Always, any military organization, you've got people who want war and people who say, if we have to have war, we need to prepare for it, but we don't want it. Wanting war is not a very good way of describing your life. If you want war, then you have a kind of problem in your brain, I think. Nobody wants war except the military-industrial complex, who make lots of money out of it, and the investors in that military-industrial complex making lots of money. They don't care that they have a war. What they don't want is their own sons and daughters coming home in body bags. Now, what the Pentagon and the CIA, Langley, the Pentagon, and the Defense Department will all be doing is quietly saying to Japan, keep going, keep pushing them. We can't publicly support you because we have to lull China into a false sense of security. That's my view. I think that's what's going on. You won't see this publicly acknowledged, but I'm fairly certain Japan would not be doing this And we know that Trump and Takaichi talked to each other. We know that Koizumi was their defense minister. He was on the television today calling an emergency meeting, a press briefing to describe what had happened here. Now, we know those people don't do this on their own. They don't have the authority. It's pretty much the same in Germany. What happened to Germany, what happened to Japan at the end of the Second World War was that America went in there and they infiltrated both countries to the point where their police service, their intelligence community, their industry, it was all American influenced. It had to be in order to survive. Anybody who was not supported by the Americans was kicked out. Anybody who didn't support the Americans was kicked out. The only people who exist at any high level of politics inside of Japan and Germany are American collaborators, effectively, because America still effectively occupies both countries. Now, how that happened with Australia is an entirely different matter. They've economically taken over Australia. But in terms of Germany and Japan, they took over those two countries militarily, intelligence, economically, financially, industrially. They just took them over and said, we're not going to let you do anything unless you are part of our regime. And then they kind of backed off a little bit in the last 30, 40 years and let those two countries appear to be more independent. But they're completely infiltrated and have been for 70 years.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that was one of the questions that was always looming over this. Is she acting on her own steam, or is this agency, or is this something else?
I don't think she's acting on her own. I mean, she may be.
Yeah.
The biggest problem I have with her acting like this now is how popular she is. She has, when she started, she had a 55% popularity rating, which is pretty high by Western democratic standards anyway. Not as high as China by any means, but by Western democratic standards, when a prime minister or president arrives with 55%, that's okay. She's gone up to 75% since.
Are you serious?
That worries me, because that tells me that Japan is not ready to reconcile with the past. It's not ready to respect what happened in the past and move forward from that. They now want. I mean, yesterday or day before was what are we now, the 9th? So a couple of days ago, we had the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And a lot of Japanese posting about how they were forced into doing this in order to release or free Asia from Western imperialism and Western colonialism. Well, yeah, if you're going to free it from Western imperialism and colonialism, the last thing you want is brutality and slavery, which is what they imposed. So they replaced Western imperialism, which for a lot of people was making money. I mean, there's no question about it. Places like Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaya, they were making good money. India as well. There was a lot of people making good money. Now, I'm not saying it was good. Don't get me wrong. But at least it was working for the elites. It was working for some. People were getting jobs. People were getting better lifestyles and stuff from the historical poverty and enslavement. But then the Japanese came in and basically enslaved everyone, and they started an entirely different war, different thing. So they weren't freeing anything. They were just transferring ownership of the slaves. The brutality was even worse than under the British, and believe me, that's pretty hard to imagine, to be worse than the British, because I know a bit about the British history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you? 75%. That is disturbing to me.
Yeah, she's quite popular now.
And this is purely and entirely because of her antagonism of China. Like, this is not about domestic front. I mean, from my understanding, the Japanese economy is taking a hit.
Yeah. Well, the Japanese economy will take a huge hit if 12,000 flights were cancelled. Now, I don't know how many passengers that is, but 12,000 flights from China to Japan were cancelled. And China took a hit with that, because a lot of those flights would have been Chinese airlines. And so China's taken a hit with this. There's nothing else you can do. I was in Uniqlo. It's Uniqlo the other day, and it's empty. There's no one there. I didn't buy anything. I just walked through there. I was actually looking for shoes. I didn't know if Uniqlo
Wait,
sold
what's
shoes or
Uniglobe?
not.
I don't know what Uniglobe is.
Uniqlo is a massive clothing store which is Japanese run. Now, Uniqlo has always been
I
quite
see.
popular in China because Uniqlo have said right from the very beginning, we don't care if our cotton comes from Xinjiang or wherever. We're going to still trade. We're doing the same thing as we always did. We don't see an issue with cotton. So Uniqlo has been quite popular, whereas H&M, which is another thing, very, very similar style of clothing, pretty much a lot of them closed down. They get no business because they said we don't buy cotton from Xinjiang. Whereas Uniqlo said, well, we do buy cotton from Xinjiang and we don't have an issue with it, so we're going to continue. So their business in China didn't suffer, but it suffered now. Just Uniqlo is a Japanese clothing. This shirt might be a Muji, which is another Japanese. I patronize Japanese shops. I like
Yeah.
them. But the fact is, if you're going there now, you're alone. You're the only
You're by
customer.
yourself. You're going to get discounts.
True.
Yeah, that disturbs me. I had Carl Zhao on the show, and he was talking about how China is, if you ask any random Chinese person, that they are perfectly willing to settle a score of the
Oh yeah,
Second World War.
yeah.
And it seems like Japan is also. It seems like this stuff hasn't
I
necessarily
think
got down. It's just under the surface.
Yeah, Japan never really felt that they were defeated. They felt that they had kind of retreated and pulled back so they could come back again. This is very similar to what happened to Germany in the First World War. The treaty, I think it was the Treaty of Versailles,
Treaty of
didn't
Versailles.
treat them
Yeah.
very well. And Germans had to pay reparations, and it led to their massive depression. It led to massive inflation. It led to the socialists coming in and Hitler becoming powerful. And I think by 1930s, Hitler was hugely popular, and he was rebuilding a country from the ashes of defeat. And I think that's where Japan are looking now. They want to rebuild. They are going to rebuild their defense. It's not called defense anymore, or it is still the Japanese Defensive Force, JDF. So they're going to increase spending. They're going to more than double spending on that. It used to be 1%, currently it's 2%. This year it'll be 2.4%, next year 2.7%, and eventually they hope to take it up to the same as NATO at 5%. And so this is a very, very worrying development for a country that says we only have a defensive force. What the hell are their jets doing flying into international waters to follow China's forces? Now,
Right.
by the same token, you say, well, China says it only has a defensive force. What the hell are they doing there? But they're in international waters. They're not threatening Japan. They're not flying into Japan or Japan's airspace. They're in international waters doing deep-sea exercises. What's wrong with that? Every country in the world does that. It has a navy. Now, Japan effectively shouldn't be going beyond its own borders because they're defensive. That's an argument that a lot of people have had. And yet, I think someone said, Chairman Mao actually said this: if America were to drop nuclear bombs on China and kill 300 million people, we still have 300 million left. That's a very frightening statement. They can kill 300 million of us, but we still have enough to defeat them.
Well, not just
Mao
300
Mao
million.
actually said
I
that.
mean, it's like 1.1 million. It's like 1 million
Yeah.
left at that point,
Well,
right?
yeah. At the time he said it, China
time.
only had 600 million, and it's doubled since then. But at the time he said it, he was quite serious. They could do that to us. We know they could do that to us, but they will
still
never
win.
take us. They will never.
Well, let's-
No one will ever allow China, the Chinese people. My wife will get a gun, and she'll probably hand one to me as well, and I'll be fighting Australians or Filipinos on the beaches. I don't know what will happen. But quite honestly, I know for a fact that my wife and her family would defend this country to the death for sure.
Yeah.
And not a lot, every Chinese person I know, they do not want to go back to losing parts of their country like Hong Kong, like Macau, like Shanghai, like Beijing, Tianjin, Shandong, Qingdao. All of these, there were at one stage 46 different concessions or treaty ports inside of China where Chinese people were not citizens.
Wow.
Just go back to how did Japan get, and I've done this, a few of your listeners will know this story. I've done this a couple of times recently. How did Japan get Taiwan? How did Japan take over Taiwan in 1895 as a colony? They invaded China, but they didn't invade a Chinese port. They invaded a port called Port Arthur, which happens to now be called Dalian. But they invaded Port Arthur, which was a British-named port, but they weren't fighting the British. They were fighting the Russians. The Russians had taken this port from the British. And, every time they do this, it's only the Chinese people, mostly the Chinese people, who die. So the Japanese invaded Port Arthur on the Chinese mainland, fighting the Russians, and the Americans got involved. And in 1895, this was in 1890, but in 1895, the Americans got involved, and they agreed, all of them, all these parties agreed to sign a treaty. And that treaty gave parts of China to Japan. But the Chinese didn't have any say in this.
Wow.
That was how Taiwan became a Japanese colony, because the Treaty of Shimonoseki was signed in the city of Shimonoseki by Russia, by America, by Japan, and in it they gave Taiwan, Formosa, to Japan. That's how Japan got it. It was nothing to do with China. So you can see why Chinese people are angry and why they say, well, this is not going to happen again. They're not going to let it happen again. They will die first fighting to not let it happen again.
That is mind-blowing. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That is mind-blowing. The Brits take it, the Russians take it from the Brits, then the Chinese, then the Japanese come and fight the Russians and take it from the Russians.
All the Chinese were doing there was dying.
Oh, that is amazing. Yeah, I would imagine China has the spirit of never again. Like, this will never happen again.
Well, that's just one example. I mean, Qingdao. The most popular beer here is a German beer, and it comes from Qingdao. Why? Because Qingdao was a German colony. The city of Qingdao was a German city. Then you've got Shanghai, and you'd know about the concessions in Shanghai, the French Quarter, the International Quarter, which was basically America, and the British Quarter, and the Dutch Quarter, and they all had their little areas, all these, and Chinese people weren't allowed in unless they had a pass. And when they were in there, they were subject to the foreign laws, not their own laws, and so they could be kicked out. I mean, there's an old joke, and it's not actually true, that no dogs and no Chinese allowed in the park. That's actually not true, but it's a feeling that a lot of people believe it. It was done for a movie, and the sign still exists. You can buy it in certain tourist spots. You can buy this: no Chinese or dogs allowed in this park.
Allowed.
But it was a joke. But it's a fact that in Shanghai, Wuhan was another one, Chongqing was another one. All of these cities in China, even Kaiping, all of these cities in China had foreign enclaves which were not Chinese. It's a very, very frightening history when you look at it like that. And then the British came in the 1850s and they took Hong Kong, and then a few years later they took the new territories. So half of Guangdong, or not half, but a huge proportion of Guangdong is now Hong Kong as a result of that. So yeah, it's a really frightening history that China has suffered a lot, and so they're not going to let it happen again. So,
Jerry,
yeah,
let me get one more.
Carl is right.
Let me get one more. What was it, Carl? Right. Let me get one more question in, and this has to do with Thai Cambodia. So Thailand has been doing sorties and has been bombing, let's say, the border regions of Cambodia at this point. Obviously, Cambodia had fired artillery into Cambodia. This sparks back off. Apparently, Donald Trump's peace deal wasn't as eternal as Donald Trump thought his peace deal between these two countries were. And I'm putting it in quotes because it's absurd. But what do you think the impetus of this is? Is this internal dynamics, or is something else going on here?
It's hard for me to say because I'm not there, but certainly when you get Burma, Cambodia, and Thailand involved in anything, there's a lot of American influence there. A lot. There is Chinese influence, no doubt at all. A lot of people think that Thailand borders China. It doesn't. It's not far away, but you have to go through either Burma or Laos or Cambodia to get to Thailand. You can't go directly to Thailand from China. You can go to Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Burma, but you can't go into Vietnam to get to Thailand. So Thai they don't share a border with China, so there's a little less of the apparent tensions. Now, there are tensions, there are difficult areas, there are bombs coming over the Chinese border at different stages, and there are Chinese people dying inside of China when these things flare up. So you don't want Cambodia, Burma, Thailand, and Laos or Vietnam involved in any conflict. So China is very much the peacemaker, the calming the oil on the settling the oil on the waters, that kind of thing. Whereas America is sending, used to send USAID, a lot of. One of the greatest things that I saw here was how the BBC suffered. The BBC lost USAID funding. It was in Burma, not in Cambodia, but they lost USAID funding because they were conducting journalist schools and making documentaries about how they were training journalists in truth. Truth matters out there, but it's only truth matters is what the Americans want you to believe is true. I'm not an expert in that area, in that zone. Probably I'm not the best person to ask. Get Brian Beletic on your show and you'll get absolutely full on. There's a couple of other people. There is a guy called Dr. James Digby Wren who is in Cambodia now, and he discusses. He's a consultant to the government, so he knows his stuff. He's a former Australian diplomat, very, very clued in guy. So James Digby Wren, or Digby James Wren, I think. So he's a good guy to get on. Brian Beletic is a very, very good guy to get on to ask questions about that region. They know what's going on. Brian is, I wouldn't say Brian is anti-America. I think he's pro-America. He's just anti-American strategy. He isn't American. He's a former U.S. Marine and a very, very switched-on guy with what's going on in that part of Asia, much more so.
He lives there. He actually lives in Taiwan.
He lives in Bangkok,
Yeah, he lives in Bangkok. So, yeah. Jerry, thank you for this, man. Great breakdown. Great breakdown. Jerry Gray, and just to give the audience a heads up on who you are, Jerry Gray, he's host of Jerry's Takes on China, or Jerry Take on China. He's lived in China for more than 21 years and has traveled more than 40,000 kilometers on bike across the country. I put that tidbit in because I want people to realize how plugged in you are into the country itself.
China, yeah. But it's not like I live in a bubble of. There's a lot of people come to China and they live in what I call a Sanlitun bubble. Sanlitun is a region of Beijing where a lot of foreigners live, and I'm seeing in your audience a lot of the names of people who follow me and comment on my section. So it's great to see someone says Jerry's pretty cool. I like him. I like that. So I'm very, very happy with the way my life has developed into this, and I want to thank people like you and the audience for their trust in me, because it really does mean a lot. It's not what I set out to do when I retired from work, but it's been a really interesting journey, and I'm thoroughly enjoying this and meeting a lot of great people. So thank you, Jamal, and thank you to the audience for having me on tonight. And
absolutely,
Merry Christmas,
man.
if I don't see you before.
Merry Christmas, absolutely. I'm sitting in Nepal currently. I'm sitting in Kathmandu.
Oh, right. Yeah. I met a Nepalese lady the other day, the first Nepalese person I've ever met, and she's married to an Australian guy. Yeah, beautiful lady. And Jack Tor, who's on YouTube, he travels the world. He's in Australia right now, and I met him and his wife in Hangzhou last week, or week before last.
Yeah, there are attractive women everywhere, including here. my the nurse at the hospital. Jesus. Jerry, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. You be safe, okay? You have a good night.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody else, and good night.
Bye-bye. Jerry is awesome, and Jerry Gray gave a fantastic breakdown. I love having various points of view. Carl's point of view was a little bit different in regards to why the Japanese prime minister was doing in the relationship between the U.S. and Japan in regards to the conversations that they were having. Jerry's take, I think I guess I'm amenable to both. And I know that sounds contradictory, but I exist in the space of unknowing. The truth of the matter is the United States has shown propensity to do this. Hey, no, really, we're in negotiations. We're working behind the scenes. We're doing all of this stuff. And you find out they're not necessarily doing anything. Gaza would be a really good example. Joe Biden coming out saying, hey, we're working tirelessly. We're doing everything we can to get a ceasefire, blah, 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 blah. And then you find out, not so much. Joe Biden effectively allowed anything to take place. And, when conversations will come up and says Donald Trump and Netanyahu are arguing, and your humble host would say BS, BS. So this idea of Donald Trump or getting press statements that Trump tells the prime minister to calm the F down, maybe, maybe not. This will be no different than Trump pretending to be peacemaker in Ukraine while simultaneously waging a terrorist war, or for that matter, a war on oil fields in Ukraine, right? You're pretending to be one thing as you do something else behind the scenes. So that's not necessarily a shocking take in the sense that, or the possibility of it to be true. So yeah, there's that. I will look up Digby James to see if I can get him to come on and discuss the Cambodian thing. That should be interesting. But my guest is here. I have been eager to have this conversation like nobody's business. David, how you doing, man?
As well as you would expect under the circumstances, I guess. Which is not
Yes.
very good.
Okay, fair enough. I forgive my excitement because I am fascinated by what it's, and I get excited when I get fascinated by what's happening. And just for the audience, David Hundeyin, he is an investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, 2023 James Curry Fellow at Cambridge University, and your media your media site, it's called The Spearhead, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So definitely check him out. Okay. Benin. Let's talk Benin. So we get let's call it a coup that seemingly is in progress, where I guess the TV station is taken over. As the TV station is taken over, the people effectively announce that they're overthrowing the government. This goes on for a bit, where it becomes clear that they have not overthrown the government. And eventually you get the president coming out, making a statement, effectively attesting to that point. This is the president coming out on his statement. I'm not going to play this because I think it's in a different language. But this is Benin's president, Patrice Talon. I think, correct me if I'm getting that wrong. Nigeria has airstrikes. Talon, thank you. Nigeria has airstrikes. On top of Nigeria having airstrikes, ECOWAS apparently sends military into the area, and France is apparently conducting some kind of overland flights or some kind of reconnaissance flights. I don't know if France actually attacked the area. That is the beginning of the story. There's more to it, but break this down for us. This is another West Africa state that tried to, let's say, take its sovereignty at the barrel of a gun. What's going on with this? Break this down for us.
So you would have to start this story in August 2023, because what happened then is a direct precursor of what is happening now. So what happened actually late July 2023, when the coup in Niger took place, this exact sequence of events actually took place then. The only difference then was the actual military strike didn't take place, and there were two reasons that it didn't take place. First, the so-called ECOWAS and President Tinubu in particular had given advance notice that, I think it was 3 days or so. They said in 3 days' time that they're going to invade. And that essentially gave the Nigerian authorities time to consolidate, to reach out to their friends in Burkina Faso and Mali. And as you might recall, a joint statement was then put out stating that in the event of any sort of military incursion into Niger, that the militaries of Burkina Faso, Mali, and I believe even Algeria at a point were going to stand with Niger. So that was like the 50% of the reason why that didn't happen. And then the second half was that even within Nigeria itself, there was a lot of resistance to this idea. So within the military let me not say high command, but within the chain of command, someone actually leaked the attack instructions, like the top secret document from the National Security Advisor's Office. Someone actually leaked it to me, and I put it on social media, which put me in a very interesting situation for 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 the subsequent few months. And then
Wait,
the
wait, wait.
the
They leaked it to you and you put, oh, that is amazing. That's awesome. I'm sorry. Please continue. That's
oh
just
yeah,
badass.
oh yeah, that happened. It's in my book. It was a very interesting period because I was accused of treason. I was accused of sabotaging an ECOWAS security operation, and an attempt was made actually to kidnap me from Ghana, where I was living at the time, and I had to flee. I had to basically run.
Wow.
So I spent a while in Kenya. It was a 2023 was a crazy year for all sorts of reasons. But that aside, the Nigerian Senate as well, when they got wind of this plan to invade Niger, they made it absolutely clear that under no circumstances would they give the constitutionally required permission to stage this invasion. So it didn't end up happening. However, between then and now, it is clear that whether it's ECOWAS that came up with this initiative independently, which I severely doubt, or it was a French foreign ministry operation, which I suspect it is, a certain infrastructure has been put in place or had been put in place between 2023 and now to ensure that the next time an anti-imperialist coup took place in West Africa, it would basically get stomped on very, very quickly. And that's basically what we witnessed, and that's what we're witnessing play out. And they actually, to be fair, they actually did a sort of victory dance about it. They like this is not hidden information. So they created something called CEWAS, CEWAS. That's the Continental Early Warning System. So it's basically a hidden infrastructure created by the European Union. It's supposed to be continental, but it's been specifically activated in West Africa in ECOWAS for obvious reasons. And basically, that CWAS is what has done its job now. That and the job of this infrastructure is basically that as soon as the coup starts happening or is about to start happening, then there's an overwhelming response to stomp it out. So first, there's the information warfare. So it seemed like within a few minutes of the coup plotters seizing the national TV station and making that declaration, which I thought was very poorly timed anyway. But so typically, how a coup works or used to work in Africa is whoever gains control of the national TV and radio broadcast service and gains control of the presidential palace and then secures the airports and the capital, that person is the new government. That's that's the conventional method for effecting a coup. However, in 2025, it's not that simple because the government TV and radio station is not the sole arbiter of information any longer because there's the internet and social media now. So what happened was they made this statement and they thought that based on their conventional 1990s understanding of what a coup is, that meant that they had finished the job and they had not, to put it very, very, very lightly. Um, and so almost immediately there was a barrage of contradictory information stating that first of all, the president, President Talon, is alive and well and he's safe, and he was not captured by the coup plotters, which they no doubt will think was a strategic error on their part. I personally am struggling to understand why they would even make an announcement without having secured the location of the president first. This is just a personal opinion. It just seemed quite poorly planned or poorly executed to me. Um, and then almost immediately we also started getting counter visuals. So an announcement was then made by, I believe it was the foreign minister, or no, the minister of the interior of Benin Republic. And what most people didn't know was that this announcement, which appeared to be a TV announcement, wasn't made on the state TV channel. It was made on a private TV channel, which obviously indicates that at that time he was not his the coup had not been put down yet, as they claimed it had. But it was very important for them to plant that idea into the public consciousness that this thing has already failed. It's done. right? So he appeared on a privately owned TV station. As we later then got to find out, the reason a lot of that was possible was basically that the French embassy, a lot of these governments um, figures had taken shelter in the French embassy in Benin, and it was from the French embassy that they were actually broadcasting these visuals, right? So in terms of the information warfare part of the early warning system and the response, I I think it was spot on. They basically they seized the narrative from the coup plotters very, very quickly and very, very effectively. And then came the military arm of the response, which managed to surprise even me. And the reason it came as a surprise to me was twofold. First of all, um, an African country carrying out military aggression, like states on state aggression against another African country, is very rare. So we've actually done a story about this at the Spearhead, and we're only able to, from the independence era to date, we're only able to identify, I think, 7 instances where such a thing had ever happened, where a state like flew like bombing raids or air strikes, you know, into the territory of another African state to carry out a geopolitical uh, operation. It's not something that happens very often. I know they made those noises in 2023, but again, because it was so decisively panned in 2023, and everyone in Nigeria seemed to agree that it was a terrible idea after the fact. I didn't really think that even if it was going to happen, it would have been that quick, but it was lightning quick. Um, so President Macron put out a tweet where he basically, in my opinion, he basically boasted to the world that this is my new attack dog in West Africa, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and look what he's about to do. Because literally within a few minutes of President Macron putting out the tweet where he said, I've spoken to Bola Tinubu and we have agreed to cooperate on some security, yada, yada, yada. Then the news came out that there's Nigerian Air Force fighter jets flying over Cotonou. And then within a few minutes, started hearing reports that they're carrying out airstrikes in partnership with the French Air Force, which was apparently flying reconnaissance, or at least that's what they claim, that they were flying reconnaissance. They might have actually been the ones doing the bombing. We'll probably never know, right? But they will obviously be happy to leave the responsibility for that to the Nigerians, many of whom, in their state of, incredible torpor, ignorance, I don't know what it is, seem to be sort of celebrating some kind of victory dance. I think that made them feel very powerful or something. I don't think the realization of what it is that they've done and the damage that this is going to do to Nigeria, I don't think it has registered at all. So I think, as with so many other things, it's a lesson that we learned at leisure. But yeah, that's basically what happened. So it all happened, like blink and you miss it, basically.
Yeah.
Like it was over almost as soon as it began.
Between the Sahel states, for example, and Benin, what did one get right and the other get wrong? Was it just mass support, seizing power, etc.? Whereas in Benin, it was them going after television stations more than anything else. Like what was the
I
the
think
main distinction between the two?
I think what the Sahelians did successfully was they mobilized the people first and foremost. So like in Burkina Faso in 2022, when Ibrahim Traore took power, it was a popular revolution, which is why it was basically bloodless, right? It was a popular revolution. The people themselves made it very clear that any attempt to push back on it would mean that you would have to fight the people as well. And
Right.
not even a military junta is prepared to go to war with an entire population of people, because if you destroy a country to rule over it, then what are you going what country will you
What's
then
the
have
point?
to rule over? Um, Something similar happened in Niger when the noises were being made about a Nigerian army invasion into Niger. The Nigerians came out onto the streets like in their millions, and it became very, very clear very quickly that this is a popular revolution. This is not just a conventional military palace coup. This is a popular revolution, and if you're going to push back on this, then you have to push back on 21 million people. However,
Yeah.
in this case, it seems very much to me like even though there may have been some popular support in Benin, it doesn't seem like the sort of overwhelming support that it was in Burkina Faso or in Niger. It really doesn't. That's not the impression that I get. The impression that I get based on my interaction with people on the ground, and I'll also mention this that I'm actually from a town called Badagry, which is right on the border with Benin, right? So we're so in fact I literally have cousins who live there because you know how it is with African states where some guy in Germany drew a line in the sand on a map somewhere and said that this is Nigeria and this is Benin. Meanwhile, we're kind of like the same people. So that's
Right.
kind of the situation that I'm in. So I literally have Beninese cousins, right? We literally have family members who are split across this national boundary. So I know quite a few people there. I've spoken to quite a few contacts on the ground, and the impression that I get is basically that everyone is almost like just it's like a football match to them, almost waiting to see what the outcome is going to be. It doesn't seem like anyone had any particularly strong
Feelings one way or the
feelings
other.
about it either way, So I don't know, make of that what you will, but I think that was the main point of failure for these coup um, for the people who tried this attempted coup, that there was no real overwhelming mass support. And regardless of how well planned your coup is, I don't think this was particularly well planned. But even if it was well planned, if there is no popular support for it, it's going to fail. And I just don't feel like there was that much of uh, public, like the if you like the wellspring of public opinion had not been properly primed. I feel like the Beninese people were not ready for this. So yeah, I also feel like maybe the fact that this took place on a Sunday morning, everyone is at home preparing to go to church, everywhere is all sleepy and quiet. Maybe that might have also played a role in it.
Bad timing.
Maybe if this
Also,
took yeah, timing, maybe if this took place on a Wednesday afternoon, would have been having a different conversation. So there, and then for me, the most obvious failure is why on earth would you go on TV and make an announcement when you haven't actually,
captured the
carried
king,
out
made the
carried out the
president.
objective? Yeah, you're just making an announcement. You've actually not done anything that you say you've done. So if you're going to, and I should also specify, this is not necessarily me advocating for how to take out a sitting president or anything.
Right.
This is me
Right. Right.
speaking academically, that based on historical precedents, if you're going to take out a sitting president in Africa or a government in Africa via coup, the two most important things you have to do are you have to secure the head of state himself. You have to physically have custody of him, and then you need control over the information space. And I think they failed on both counts because their idea of control over the information space was controlling the national TV station. Well, the opposition simply came, or their opposition simply came and used other TV stations and social media. And then they didn't have custody of the president. If you don't have custody, if the Nigerians didn't have custody of Mohamed Bazoum, they would have failed as well.
Yeah.
So, so to be honest, I sympathize with the idea on an ideological level of an anti-imperialist coup. I do, and I make no apologies for that. But I also think that if you're not fundamentally prepared to do this thing well, then you should never attempt it. Because
To do it
I feel
at
like
all.
it's one of those deals. Like you know how they say if you swing for the king, you better not
You better
miss.
get him.
Well, I
Yeah.
feel like these guys absolutely missed.
Yeah. You're not going to get two chances at the king in this way. Um, the public in the Sahel states seem to be very animated and pissed off at the French. And that added to the capability of the coup to succeed. As you
Yeah.
pointed out, though, Benin seemed more meh. Like they didn't
There's a
seem to
reason
have
for
this.
that.
Yeah,
There's a
please.
reason for that. And the reason is primarily economic. As you know, the Sahel has been the poor cousin of West Africa for the longest time. So West Africa is roughly split into two. There's the coastal states and the Sahelian states. And the coastal states generally are much, much, much wealthier than the Sahelian states. The Sahelian states historically have just been the poorest, not just in the region, but in the world.
Yeah.
So you can imagine where you have, say in 2015, for example, when Nigeria was was the largest economy in Africa, had entered the world's top 20 economies, was growing at 7% annually, was like half a trillion of GDP. And it was right next to Niger, which was, I think, at that time in the bottom two of the world's poorest countries. So the difference has always been very, very stark. So there's the coastal West Africans who are all, relatively comfortable, who have experienced booming economies, who have visual references for what wealth looks like in their environments. They have ideas of like self-actualization and whatnot. And then you have the Sahelians who inhabit a completely different reality where pretty much everybody's poor.
Yeah.
And there's historically has been no real sign that there's ever going to be an economic breakout, right? So I feel like that economic situation played a factor in sort of shaping the minds of Sahelians a bit differently to those of coastal West Africans. I feel like Sahelians are definitely a lot more bloody minded. I think they're hardier. I think they're more determined people. And I think they're also more ideologically driven people because I think that's what hardship forces you to become.
Yeah.
Now, the coastal states, on the other hand, and Benin is a very prime example of this, probably the worst example of this, actually, because Benin is in a very unique situation where, in addition to being a coastal state, having access to the ocean, access to global trade, and all of that, is also a gateway state, not just to Sahelian countries, because it has two borders with the Sahel. It has borders with Burkina Faso and with Niger. For many, many years, was acting as their de facto port. So all of their international trade is coming in through Benin, and obviously they have to pay fees to Benin for that. It might also
Mhm.
interest you to know that for the longest time, because of the sheer congestion at the port in Lagos, in Nigeria, Benin was also functioning as a de facto port for Nigeria. So when you have like Benin, which is a
Interesting.
population wise is a tiny country next to this huge giant, and it's functioning as the port for 200 million people, you can imagine the sheer amount of wealth that was being created in Benin just by existing. Didn't have to do anything special. Just
Mhm.
build a port. You don't even run it yourself because it's run by a guy called Vincent Bollor. He's a French guy. You might know him. And a lot of the industry and whatnot is run by like Lebanese or whatnot. But as a local, I guess you didn't really have to do much because there's so much trade and activity going on around you, which is not through any government policy or any it's not through the dexterity of the country by any means. It's just by the accident of location and the fact
Mhm.
that it's surrounded by other people that find it geographically convenient to use Benin as an entry point. So when you're in that kind of country, why would you want to rock the boat? Why would you really want anything to change? Yeah, so
I see.
ideologically, you might have an ideological grouse with the fact that yeah, you don't have your own currency. The French government still makes you use the CFA franc. You're not functionally sovereign. You might have a grouse with all of these things, but on a normal day-to-day level, your life is really not that bad, at least compared to your neighbors, right? So if you grew up in Cotonou, which is the capital of Benin, you have a lot of visual reference for what prosperity looks like. You've seen it because it's there, it exists, right? It's a neo-colonial form of prosperity, but it's still there, and it's very evident, right? So you can have that social aspiration that I aspire to live in this part of town. You know, fair enough. The people that live there might not necessarily look like me. They might all be Lebanese or French or whatever, but
Mhm.
there are a few people that who look like me that live there. So I aspire to be one of them. I aspire to do this and do that. Whereas if you grew up in Bamako, or some random city, Bobo Dioulasso in Burkina Faso, you don't have any of those visual references. All you've ever seen is poverty. That's literally all you know. So of course you would be absolutely dissatisfied and you would absolutely want something to change. And as soon as the opportunity for some kind of change presented itself, you would absolutely throw yourself at it. But if you're from Benin,
Not so much.
change is a nice thing to talk about, but when it happens in practice, and then you have some guy on TV in military fatigues telling you your comfortable self to come out onto the streets and support him to take out the puppet government, you people gonna be like,
Yeah.
yeah. What do you need me for?
Interesting.
You're the one who has the guns, you know. So I'm just gonna sit here and watch the revolution on TV, basically.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. You pointed out something else. You said Nigeria has destroyed itself. I'm paraphrasing. When you were tweeting this out, and you was like, Nigeria has just destroyed itself. And you point out, even in this interview, you said this would damage Nigeria going forward, and they don't quite realize it. Damage them how? What is the damage that is being done to Nigeria in conducting these airstrikes at the behest of France?
So two major things. First is that in terms of um, image and diplomatic credibility in Africa, Nigeria has basically signed its death warrant. I said earlier that in the entire history of post-colonial Africa, you can point to maybe 7 occasions where an African military put boots in another African country and carried out airstrikes or anything like that. It's just not a thing that happens regularly. Africa is not like Europe or something. It's a very different kind of place. And it's assumed that state versus state violence in Africa is like the worst possible outcome. To put that in perspective, I believe it was actually this was referenced in Kwame Nkrumah's book, uh, 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 Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, where he actually warned that if it ever gets to a point where African states have state-on-state violence, that's when you know that imperialism has succeeded fully in its final form, right? So for Nigeria to do this, for Nigeria to act out this extreme form of puppetry, I mean, puppetry is not a rare thing on this continent, but this is an extreme form where you're not just. So, for reference, I should also mention that Nigeria used to be a country which was referenced as a counterbalance to Western influence in Africa. Nigeria used to be that country. As recently as the 1990s, Nigeria was a country that was able to unilaterally or almost unilaterally quell civil wars happening in Liberia and in Sierra Leone in its
Mhm.
neighborhood, where foreign actors were very happy for that war, for those wars to go on. And the Nigerian military, under the then General Abacha, went in there, in a fairly crude manner, but still got the job done and actually ended those wars just by virtue of having the weight of a military with like 250,000 fighting men,
Mhm.
right? This, by African standards, the Nigerian military is humongous. It's huge, it's massive. So this is a country which, for the longest time, has had this self-image of itself as the giant of Africa. This country which has this manifest destiny to someday be a very important country in the world, to someday be a regional hegemon, not just in Africa, but internationally. And then you're now in a situation where you are being puppeted not by China, not by the US, not even by Russia. You're being puppeted by France, which is like, of all the colonial powers, France is like the most third rate. It's like it's one step above being puppeted by maybe Portugal or Spain. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. So to put it in further perspective, France has less than a third of Nigeria's current assumed population. So if you're going to be puppeted, a country the size of Nigeria, the influence, the continental influence that Nigeria has no business being puppeted in the first place. But if you're going to be puppeted, at least be a US puppet or a Chinese puppet or a Russian puppet, because those are countries that you can say objectively have the size to be able to pull that off. Why on earth is Nigeria being puppeted by France? So that's the one thing. Nigeria has absolutely torpedoed its credibility on the African continent. Nobody is ever going to take Nigeria serious again in a diplomatic sense in Africa. Whatever goodwill or credibility Nigeria has managed to build up over the years, over the decades, bear in mind this is the country that once used to fund African liberation movements, like armed struggles. So things happening in Mozambique, in Angola, in Namibia back in the day, Nigeria was heavily involved in those things. Sending arms and funding and training people and giving people passports and giving people residency. Nigeria used to be that guy on the African continent, and now Nigeria has basically turned into apartheid South Africa or Rhodesia, where you know the white minority regime is using the country's air force to carry out bombing raids in Mozambique to fight against communists, i.e., people fighting for African independence. Right? Nigeria has become that person now. Nigeria has become that geopolitical player. And what the extra layer of humiliation on top is that Nigeria is not doing it independently, it's doing it so at the behest of France. So it has just torpedoed whatever diplomatic credibility that it once had. Like, I am a Nigerian and I will never take Nigeria seriously again. Like, it's really just that bad.
Wow.
And then, secondly, it has also opened the door to something so dangerous. Like, I don't understand why this kind of decision would be signed off on. I really don't get it. Because if you recall, for the past couple of months, there's this geopolitical meme that has been flying around about how there's supposedly a Christian genocide in Nigeria
Yes.
and how the US um, is seeking to protect Christians by staging a military invasion of Nigeria and basically turning Nigeria into Iraq, right? And the argument that was being made, the correct argument, but the insincere argument being made by the Nigerian government in response to that was that regardless of what may or may not be happening in Nigeria, Nigeria is a sovereign country. So Donald Trump has no right to threaten or to actually deploy the US military into Nigeria, that Nigeria is a sovereign country. You must respect Nigeria's sovereignty. Now, something has happened in a sovereign country called Benin, and Nigeria has unilaterally flown its air force in there and bombed targets in a city of over 1 million people. Because bear in mind, these airstrikes are not taking place somewhere in the middle of the countryside. It's not some remote military installation near Parakou or something. This is in the middle of the city. There's smoke rising out of densely populated civilian areas. As at now, we don't know the death toll. We don't know if there's a death toll. We don't know if there's a civilian death toll or how many people there are. But just think about the implications of that. If Nigeria can do that, then that means that whoever wants to do the exact same thing to Nigeria has every justification that they need. So if tomorrow Donald Trump wakes up and decides that maybe the attempted war in Venezuela is not going well, he needs a win, and he needs to do a couple of drone strikes in Nigeria, whatever. What is there to stop him now? Like, the Nigerian government has opened the door to its own, you know, to its own irrelevance. I don't understand. Even if you are a puppet, puppets are still supposed to function with some element of self-interest.
Mhm.
I don't understand what was gained by doing this.
Also, ECOWAS has deployed troops into Benin, correct?
They've sent out a circular saying they will deploy the troops. As far as I'm aware, no such thing has actually happened.
Okay. Okay. And ECOWAS is made up of multiple countries.
Yes,
Based
so
on,
there's
but
there's
this is
11 member states, but there's only 4 that actually signed off on that statement saying that they're going to send troops in. So it was Nigeria, it was Ghana, it was Sierra Leone, and it was Cote d'Ivoire.
but ECOWAS is an economic organization, correct? Or am I getting this wrong?
It's a geopolitical union, which supposedly, so the full meaning is the Economic Community of West African States. So
Okay.
it's primarily an economic union, but it's also like, it's supposed to be anyway. It's supposed to be a customs union, which it's not. It's supposed to be a monetary union, which it's also not. It's supposed to be a free movement area, which it is nominally. It's supposed to be a lot of things, but many of those things it's not, or at least not yet.
Wow. And just to be very clear, this is effectively the plan that they came up with immediately after the Sahel states broke away to draw a red line under
Exactly.
any of the states pulling away.
Exactly. Exactly.
One of the other latest developments to this, which is rather mind-blowing when you think about it, you get a plane, Nigerian, that gets taken down with 11 military personnel from Nigeria being captured
Yeah.
in Burkina Faso. Now,
Yeah.
I'm going to show this clip because this clip is astonishing when you think about it. Now, just to show what I mean when I'm saying astonishing, this is the map of Benin. This is where it is in relation to Niger, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Togo, Nigeria. How does a plane that is supposed to be doing bombing runs on Benin from Nigeria end up across Benin into Burkina Faso? How does that work?
So they claim that it wasn't on any sort of offensive mission, that it was on a ferry mission to Portugal. And to be honest, that's kind of a plausible explanation. That would be the only explanation that actually makes sense, to be honest, because first of all, the Hercules C-130 is a transport aircraft. It's not a bomber. So you can't
Mhm.
actually use it for offensive missions, except you're using it to like fly in paratroopers. It's a transport aircraft. So and then, as you rightly said, the geographical location of Benin and that of Burkina just makes it impossible for anything relating to Benin to be happening all the way over northwest at Bobo Dioulasso. So they put out a
Yes.
statement a few hours ago. The Nigerian Air Force put out a statement a few hours ago saying that it was on a ferry flight to Portugal, and then it developed mechanical problems and had to land at the nearest possible airfield, which was the Bobo Dioulasso Airport. Now, where there is some complication in that explanation is that the Burkinabés then put out a statement last night saying that this plane had no overflight permission. Because obviously, if you're
Right.
going to fly through a country's airspace, you need overflight permission. And if you're, especially if you're going to fly a military aircraft to another country's airspace, you definitely need overflight permission. And the Burkinabes, the AES says that there was no overflight permission. So essentially, this Nigerian aircraft was just violating Burkinabe airspace all willy nilly. And then apparently had a mechanical problem and had to land. So it just raises so many questions. Like even if this official explanation is true, then what that means is it's a routine activity of the Nigerian Air Force to just go around violating the airspaces
Airspace.
of its neighbors. You know, because if you look at the map of where Bobo Dioulasso is, this is not some border region or something. This is like well into Burkina Faso. So, you know, and then it also raises questions on the Burkinabe and on the AES side that if a transport aircraft, which by military standards is actually quite slow, I mean, it's a huge, you know, it's a C-130. It's not a fighter jet or something.
Mhm.
Very subsonic aircraft, relatively slow, slower than a civilian passenger aircraft, actually. It's a propeller aircraft. And if that kind of aircraft is able to penetrate that far into your airspace, then I mean, if a more significant adversary were to be trying to stage some sort of military maneuver in your airspace, what would happen? You know, because they supposedly have purchased air defense systems from like Russia and from Iran and Turkey and whatnot. So you would have assumed that, you know, from the moment any aircraft crosses into AES airspace, that they would know
You're
maybe
aware.
it's scrambled jet fighters or something. But it seems as if in this instance, I mean, they probably did scramble jet fighters eventually because they claimed that they forced the plane to land. However, the Nigerians claim that the plane landed by itself because there was a mechanical problem. We don't know who's telling the truth. But be that as it may, it just looks like first of all, there are questions to answer on both sides in terms of basic competence. And then there's a wider question of is there an external entity that is like knocking these two heads together to try to start a regional war in West Africa? Because that is the war that nobody wants to happen in West Africa. A war which essentially takes on the characterization of being Russia versus the West. So you have Western backed Nigeria and then Russian backed AES coming to direct conflict. That's what nobody wants to see. Definitely don't want to see that because that will be the end of West Africa as we know it. Right? I will literally have no home. I might physically perish in such a conflict, you know, God forbid. So
Yeah.
you know, hopefully it doesn't come to that, but clearly something is afoot.
Okay. I, I guess I didn't think of it in those terms. I mean, I take it as that this was some. I take it as this was something related to Benin, but as you point out, the Portugal thing could be a valid answer to this.
Say
Um,
that, yeah, they claim had nothing to do with Benin. I guess we have to take their word for it. And to be
yeah,
honest, it really wouldn't make sense for it to have anything to do with Benin because the Hercules C-130 transport is a very, very, very big plane that carries a lot of supplies. So Why would you need such a plane to go to Benin when Lagos is literally next to Cotonou? It's like a 40-minute drive. It doesn't really make any
Right.
sense. So it may be that the explanation is the truth, that they're just woefully incompetent, which just kind of makes everything worse. Because if you're that incompetent and that useless, and you're there staging airstrikes on your neighbor, I mean,
One of the other questions I had on this subject, did they ever capture the people who initiated the coup in the first place?
we still don't know. So they claimed the claim was made initially that they had arrested 17 coup plotters or whatever, and then a few hours later, the leader of the coup attempt, Colonel, I forget his name now, Patrice. His the first name is Patrice. I've forgotten his surname. But
Mhm.
yeah, he appeared on this video, which famously went round. He appeared to be in some sort of studio where he basically said, "Ignore what the French are saying. The coup attempt hasn't failed. Come out into the streets." That's where he asked the Beninois to come out into the streets and whatnot. So clearly, there is, as at early this morning, there was still at least a faction of the Beninese army which was still loyal to this idea of a coup, which hadn't been put down, at least as of very early this morning. Since then, there's really been no updates. We don't really know what's going on. The last the last time we had any sort of indication as to what was going on was, I don't know if you saw that video yesterday of
I
I
did.
believe it was a Super Tucano, uh, a Nigerian Air Force Super Tucano turboprop aircraft streaking through the air above Cotonou, and then you had Beninese soldiers firing AK-47s at it, trying to bring it down. And that was yesterday. So as of now, we have to assume that it's not entirely over yet. I think it's fair to say that the coup has failed. These guys are clearly not going to unseat a government that has been able to consolidate to this point now. However, I think that they intend to go out with a bang. They intend to go out swinging. So yeah,
So basically, there's still factions of the military that are still backing the coup plotters. The government hasn't
in
necessarily been
this
able to
very much that
capture
way. Yes.
all of those
Yeah.
factions.
Yeah.
Okay. So the attacks that were taking place by the Nigerian military was effectively going after what they believed to be the stronghold of the people who initially plotted the coup.
Yeah.
Am I getting that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, who are they attacking?
They bombed military barracks in Cotonou, in the Beninese capital. Military barracks, which they thought were harboring or were being used as a base of operations for the coup plotters.
What do you think happens now in Benin's case?
I think, to be honest, I think this is the worst case scenario because I think what is going to happen, if you recall, what actually led to this was that the current president, Patrice Talon, um, had used the legislative route to entrench himself in power. So I think a presidential term was supposed to be 4 years, and he had found a way to finagle. He had finagled his way into turning it into 7 years using the legislative, and he had claimed that he was going to step down next year, but there was the perception that this guy's lying, like he always does, and he's not actually going to step down, and he's going to perpetuate himself in power and whatnot. I think this gives him every justification to do the exact thing that these people were supposedly trying to stop him from doing. I don't think um it's gonna be like like an Alassane Ouattara type of situation, like Paul Biya type of situation, where you then have this Western backed guy who nobody's allowed to criticize anymore because he is this hero who has survived this anti-democratic uprising, this coup, right? And he has done so with Western help and with this very destructive form of help from Nigeria. Those airstrikes are going to make Nigeria very unpopular in Benin, very very unpopular, and he is going to be perceived as the president who invited Nigeria to come and bomb his own people. And what's going to happen in response is that he's going to become increasingly more tyrannical, much, much, much more totalitarian than he already is. Because he already has like this very nasty streak. It's not a story that is told very often, but he has this nasty authoritarian streak where if you're, for example, you're a journalist that says a few, less than complimentary things about him, you find yourself, standing trial for terrorism. That was one of the things he famously did, where he managed to redefine the legal definition of terrorism in Benin. Terrorism can now mean criticizing the government in
Wow.
Benin, right?
Wow.
So he is going to become the that sort of Museveni type of character, where you are not a military personnel, but you are a dictator in a very militaristic sense. Like the worst sort of stereotypical dictator there is, that's exactly what he's going to become. Because who's going to
I
stop
would.
him now? I feel
Yeah.
like, and this is why I said earlier that um, the people who carried out this coup, if they were not sure that they had the capacity to carry it out, I feel like they should never have done it, because this is the kind of coup that it either succeeds and you take the country in the direction you want to take it to, or it fails and you know that that window has been shut for the next 30 years. I fear that that's what is happening.
Wow. There's a guy, David Odo. He's a global counterterrorism consultant. And he says we're losing calm with the military takeovers on the continent of Africa. These coups tend to make democracy seem dead in the water, especially as far as West Africa is concerned. Democracy is being dragged to the floor. I know that's not your
Okay.
take.
No, absolutely
I'm
not.
curious on your response. That's why I'm reading it out.
No, because again, that take sort of has this fetishized idea of democracy as like, you know, democracy is this thing which, if it is threatened, that in and of itself implies that something bad is happening. Who decided that? Democracy, or what they call democracy, is just a type of government. That's all it is. They've somehow turned it into some kind of religion,
Yes.
that if you express a thought that anything alternative to democracy is acceptable or is possible, then you have committed a heresy, and you must be punished for that. Who made these decisions? Who made these rules? You know, and again, trying to when people make comments like that and try to frame the reality of West Africa as this binary thing between military dictatorship and democracy, that's a very stupid and reductive way of looking at the world, because those are not the issues that affect people's lives in West Africa, right? I get tired of repeating the same thing over and over again. That if you look at countries like Cote d'Ivoire, for example, which is an example of the democracy that this person is upholding, Alassane Ouattara is much, much more illegitimate than any military dictatorship you can think of anywhere in the world, right? He is supposed to have had a maximum of 2 terms in office. This is his fourth term that he's just started.
Wow.
This is his fourth term. This election, he made sure that none of the major challengers who had any chance of winning him were allowed to run. Right? And these are not random people. These are people, including there's a guy called Tijan Fiam. He used to be the CEO of Credit Suisse, right? So the former CEO of Credit Suisse is running for election, is running for the presidential election in Cote d'Ivoire, and he's banned from running. That's how much of a totalitarian dictator that Alassane Ouattara is. And then you have people like this saying, "Oh no, that's democracy. You're not allowed to question it." What a stupid thing!
Yeah. David, this has been an awesome breakdown, and you do fantastic work. And I love having you on because as I was watching this, you were the first person that literally came to my mind in the sense of, okay, what is David thinking about this in the moment that this was breaking down? So thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. And the audience loves you, to put it mildly. David Hundeyin, he is an investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, the 2023 James Curry Fellow at Cambridge University, and should I call you director of Spearhead? Or what should I call you on
Um,
this?
Editor is fine.
Editor in chief.
Yeah.
Editor in chief of Spearhead. David, you have a great rest of your day, man. Thank you for this great breakdown.
Thank you for having me.
Bye bye. Oh, David did a great job. Great job. Just, in regards to trying to explain what was taking place, why it was taking place, the context surrounding what was taking place. David is fantastic. He is fantastic. Colonel Wilkerson is going to join. Not right in about 3 minutes. So I'm not necessarily going to go into another full-blown story. I will say two things to preempt him coming onto the show. Zelensky was meeting with his Europeans, and of course, they were putting their heads together, trying to figure out a way to tell Trump to F off. And Zelensky comes out and effectively says, I am not accepting territorial concessions. That's not going to happen. And there is no deal. Now, Trump, to his point, said, I'm very disappointed in what Zelensky is saying. Zelensky even noted that the deal that Trump put out was a worse deal than was given prior. Well, obviously, because you are getting taken apart on the battlefield. And even Western media at this point, I think the Telegraph had an article where the Telegraph was pointing out how Ukraine was effectively being taken apart. And in the context of being taken apart, it will make a deal that much more unfavorable to Ukraine because Trump is going to be effectively looking at what is taking place on the battlefield and the terms that Zelensky will get worse and worse and worse. And that is indeed what is taking place. That is indeed what is taking place. Okay, dude, let's be honest. You don't have to accept the deal, right? There's nothing to force you to accept the deal. What that means, however, is more desertions, more people being killed on the battlefield, more land and territory loss. Any deal that may come up in the future will have worse terms because the balance of power would have shifted tremendously. The budget deficit is not going anywhere. The political crisis that's taking place in Ukraine will most likely get worse. And at some point, we'll start zeroing in on Zelensky. I could be wrong on that. I don't think I am. But obviously, even the New York Times is putting out a publication effectively saying that Zelensky effectively turned a blind eye to the corruption that was taking place in Ukraine. You can reject it. The Europeans don't care about Ukrainians. But you're the president, supposedly, ostensibly. I see my man in the background. I want to bring him in. We are joined with Col Lawrence Wilkerson. How you doing, Colonel? You doing okay this morning?
I'm cold.
It is cold here too. I have a heater, like right here in the back, that is trying to do God's work, but is not necessarily heating up the room.
10 degrees, 11 degrees doesn't come this early in December normally where I live.
Is it? It is, I think it's like 60 degrees, 65 degrees here. And I know I'm complaining about being cold in comparison, but keep in mind, I was in Malaysia and it was like 80 degrees, 90 degrees every day.
Oh,
and so after you've been in a warm climate for several months, dropping into the 30, 40 degrees less.
Where were you, in Kuala Lumpur or where?
I was in Kuala Lumpur. I stayed in Kuala Lumpur for 3 months. And then I went to Jakarta and I was there for 2 months.
Wow.
And so, yeah, in Jakarta, I mean, it could be 11 o'clock at night and it's like 85 degrees.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. It's
You're
great.
getting around ASEAN.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. As soon as I jump into Kathmandu, the temperature is like 30 degrees less. And it's like, Jesus, what happened? What happened? Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, he is former distinguished visiting professor for government and public policy at College of William & Mary in Virginia. He's also taught 6 years at the University Honors Program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known, as retired United States Colonel and former Chief of Staff for Secretary of State Colin Powell. So I guess the first thing that I want to hit you on is I'm very curious on your take on what is taking place with Hegseth. You are a military man, or at the very least you were a military man. You made it up to the rank of colonel. And what we're seeing is effectively the United States Navy murdering random people that it doesn't necessarily know in the Caribbean. And what's wild to me about this, as I pointed out, I sound like a broken record, but I'll say it again. The United States is trying to overthrow the government of Maduro. There's that. And on top of doing that, has decided on a murderous campaign of mass murder in the Caribbean as it's doing so. The media doesn't seem to take issue with that. What the media takes issue with is a double tap. that they hit a boat. The boat wasn't even traveling to America. That was one of the new revelations. 2 people hanging off the side of the boat, waving to try to get help. They wait over 40 minutes and then send another bomb in order to murder those 2 people in the boats. And the media says, well, wait a minute, that's impolite. That's a foul. Give me your take on this as somebody that was in the military. And like, this behavior seems to be way beyond the pale.
It's a war crime. There's no question in my mind it's a war crime. And I haven't even seen the video, but I trust those who've told me what's in the video, both military and otherwise. And this morning, it was summed up in a way that probably needs to get Americans' attention. Heather Cox Richardson starts off her article of yesterday, I think, with a description of what was said on 3 December, as I recall, in a press conference by the President of the United States when asked if he would let that video out. Of course I will. No problem there. And then 5 days later, he's asked by another reporter, you said you would let the video out about the 2 September killing. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. And he turned to somebody and said, get rid of that woman. She's a fake news woman or something. This is the President of the United States making a statement on one day that's directly contravened by himself later about this event. So that tells you something about, I think, even his grasp of the seriousness of this. This is a war crime, no question. The only questions are who was involved in it. And that's the debate that's taking place. Was the Secretary of Defense the number 2 in the chain of command for the military underneath the Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, guilty of giving the direction to go ahead, either by his slang or by a direct order? Or, as he has tried to depict, did he push that down to Admiral Bradley, and Admiral Bradley's the scapegoat here? Either way you look at it, though, one of those men is a creator of war crimes, and the top guy who authorized these war crimes, because this isn't the only one, every extracurricular killing on the high seas that's taken place, it's over 80 now, I'm told, is a war crime. This can be tracked right back to my president, George W. Bush. His turning to his adjutant general to give him, which John Yoo and David Addington did produce, a definition of torture whereby he could then authorize human torture at the highest levels in the land, the presidency of the United States, is now being used to authorize so-called national security threat by narco-terrorists. What's the difference between George W. Bush and the global war on terror, and now this extrapolation into a global war, or at least the Caribbean and Pacific Ocean war on narco-terrorists? They're both preposterous constructs. At least Bush had the shadow behind him, if you will, of 3,000 or so Americans who'd just been killed. And he had a rage, as he said it in the Oval Office. I've got a rage. He even called some Christians in to assemble around the Oval Office table and convince him that his rage ought to be attenuated somewhat. He had a genuine reason to do what he did. Trump has no more reason than this, Jamal. If we don't get our hands on that 300 billion barrel reserve of Venezuela very quickly, the world is going to move swiftly to denominate in international oil sales in other than the dollar.
Right.
We need that oil to rebuttress our position in the Western Hemisphere with regard to that phenomenon. So that's what we're after there. This is war crimes in an attempt to get oil, and nothing's new there.
Yeah. The other one I want to get to is Zelensky apparently meets with his European, I don't know, mean girl crew. And Zelensky comes back, has been reported in Washington Post, New York Times, Axios, etc., that Zelensky is saying, no deal. I am not accepting territorial concessions. I'm not accepting a deal. I'm not accepting anything, which is pretty astonishing considering what's happening on the battlefield currently, day by day. Give me your thoughts on this. I mean, is he going to be able to maintain this particular position going forward?
I think not. I think what we're going to see is the elimination of Zelensky, either by what we used to call the 13-cent solution, although now a bullet costs about $1, or some other method that we don't envision right now that might even be somewhat conducive to the shift of Ukraine from what it has been, which is a criminal state, into a less criminal state, and eventually maybe even into a liberal democracy. It is certainly not that, and hasn't been that. And all the rhetoric that we've put out there from Biden and Blinken and Sullivan and others, that Ukraine is this sort of, free state that's looking to defend itself. And this is not to discount from the bravery of some very courageous young Ukrainians who've been on the battlefield. But basically, it's a corrupt state. It's a criminal state. That's what I pronounced it. That's what Colin Powell pronounced it in 2002 and 2003 when we first started looking at it and trying to figure out how to deal with it. A criminal state. Incidentally, the only other state in the world at that time we couched as a criminal state was North Korea. So Zelensky's going, and he can take his choice. He can get in his Bugatti and try to drive out. He can get in an airplane, of which he has a plenty, and try to fly out to one of his billion-dollar dashes, or he's going to stay around. They're going to get rid of him one way or the other. Maybe even the Nazis might get rid of him because they're growing restless with his attitude too. Mm-hmm. Ukraine needs a new leader, and frankly, Putin and Sergei Lavrov are absolutely right that they cannot negotiate with a man who is unconstitutionally the head of the Ukrainian state. So they need to do it by roughly constitutional processes. They need to have a new election and a new president. He's staying at his peril. I will almost guarantee you that. And Donald Trump is not going to help him and has made that very clear. And the Europeans are angry about that and are trying to foil that. But I'm sorry, they have no money. They have no leadership. They have no wherewithal, defense or otherwise, to do that. So all they can do is play around in the mud. They can make problems, but all they're doing is playing around in the mud that they have created.
Well, there was a leaked conversation where behind the scenes, they were like, they don't trust Donald Trump. They think Donald Trump is going to throw them under the bus. I find the conversation to be warped. I mean, over 1 million Ukrainians are dead. Like the entire premise of the coup that took place in 2014 was throwing Ukraine under the bus, considering all of this was foreseeable. I mean, what is their end game? I mean, certainly, I don't have this belief that they can't see what's happening on the battlefield. I don't believe that for a moment. Their own publications, like the Telegraph, what is it? There's Ziegel or Der Zeit or whatever the name of the publication is in Germany. All of these publications, even in the United States, are reporting the number of desertions, the budget deficit. The ECB just recently came out saying you're not going to take the Russian money. Belgium is not going to give up the Russian money. So you have a budget deficit. You have a corruption case that has been just roiling Ukraine at this point. The lights are out in Kiev for like 15 hours because of the attacks that have been taking place by the Russians. I think there was like 1,000 drone missile strikes, if not yesterday, the day before yesterday. Ukraine can do nothing about any of this. They're losing territory faster. The Europeans have to see this. What is their end game? Like, what are they seeing that, let's say, the Trump administration, when Trump is like, I want to bring this to a close. What's the difference in these things?
Well, we have we military individuals with whom I discuss these things sometimes, we have a short description of what's happening right now. It is that the United States is giving weapons that it does not have to the Europeans for money they do not have, who will give them to the Ukrainians for soldiers they do not have. That's how farcical this entire affair is. And to get back to the Europeans in a very significant way, I think, you look at Starmer, you look at Merz, you look at Macron, and you see, as I've said before, dead men walking. They do not represent their people. Increasingly, day by day, that is becoming even more poignant and more true. The Germans, the French, the British, at least in England, maybe I think in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, do not believe that Starmer's on the right track, nor Merz, nor Macron. And I think that's going to spread to other people, as it has already spread to the Netherlands. You may have noticed they elected an entirely new leader. I think that's going to happen everywhere. You're going to have people that are either like Orban, for example, in Hungary, or you're going to have people who are somewhere in the middle, but know that their future, politically speaking, is in restoring, not destroying, the very robust social programs that these countries have had until they joined NATO. Because these were the programs that kept their people content, happy. The Danes are often called, for example, the happiest people in the world. They have free education, they have free health care, they have all manner of different kinds of things that pertain to the really luxurious social programs they have that cannot be maintained if they go to these percentages of GDP for defense that their leaders now are claiming they're going to, particularly in Germany. Now, we could have a real problem here. We could have a reversion to a 1930s type Europe where everybody's squabbling and fighting with one another, in the midst of which the machine of Europe grows up again into a very powerful entity. I mean, Germany, of course, and becomes a threat. Or we could have a series of leaders who restore these programs, forget about this business of Russia being a major threat to them. It is no threat to them. Putin has said it dozens of times. If Russia is to become a threat to Europe as a whole, it will be because the Europeans forced him to do it. Let me say that again. The only way Russia is going to become an existential threat to Europe as a whole is if Europe forces him to become that. He as much as said that over and over again in English and in Russian. I do not want a war with NATO. I do not want a war with Europe, but I'm prepared. When you get in that position, and he's in that position to a certain extent now by these leaders who are hanging on and making the remarks they're making and doing what they're doing and keeping Donald Trump from shutting this whole thing down. That's what they're trying to do. He's getting into that position with them. And this could take off and be, as we had said all along, a much wider war, first a regional war, and then the question becomes, what does the United States do? You know, if there is a war that develops between the residual European members of NATO and Russia, what does the United States and Canada do? Do they rush in as members of NATO and enter that fray? I think not. So the Europeans need to think twice and thrice about what they're doing right now, because they're foreclosing their future.
But, you know, the pressure that will be on America under that model would be astonishing. I mean, you would have Lindsey Graham, all of these members of Congress screaming at the top of their lungs, the blob screaming at the top of their lungs. Oh, my God, we can't abandon. I mean, think of Ukraine, for example. Donald Trump gets in claiming he had every capability to walk. But because of this, let's say, perception that he would be given up to the Russians, that he would be abandoning Ukraine, et cetera, at least that's what the reporting points out, he doesn't do it. And so the Europeans know that they can go have a conversation with Zelensky because they don't believe that Trump will ultimately walk.
Oh, he will. And look at the strategy they just put out, both the defense strategy and the document that preceded that, which sort of discussed geopolitical, geostrategic issues in general. If you look at that strategy and you look at what Hegseth said about it, however imperfectly he said it, and coming from him, it automatically gains an imperfection, because you're looking at the equivalent of a lieutenant telling you about the U.S. strategy. And what that strategy says, it's very carefully hidden if you don't parse it closely. What that strategy says is we are going to stay in the Western Hemisphere and establish a redoubt from which we can respond to China in a fashion that will defeat them. That's what that strategy says. It doesn't say that we're taking on a new color, intent, and tone to the way we have practiced our imperial wants since 1945. What it says is we're readjusting those wants to the point where we recognize the number one enemy is China. We recognize they're beating the hell out of us in every category of competition right now, peaceful and warlike. We realize if we went to war with them right now, we would be roundly defeated. So we're coming home, husbanding our strength, building up our wherewithal in our own hemisphere so that we then can launch out and defeat China. Meanwhile, we will stay in the South China Sea, now the busiest commercial part of the oceans of the world, in the world, And we will still do our freedom of navigation exercises. And we will also keep the Japanese and the Filipinos and the Australians and anybody else that wants to join in the fray, including Korea and Japan, of course. And we will whoop ass on China when it comes time. That's what that strategy says. And you think Lindsey Graham and some of these other idiots in the Congress are going to object to that when they begin to understand it? They're getting ready to pass $1 trillion plus defense budget. And they're creating $2 trillion in interest payments on our national debt within three to 5 years. So we're looking at disaster all across the horizon, and we're designing a strategy to deal with it, supposedly. I want to see it. I want to see how it happens. I'll probably be dead, but this is no strategy to deal with the problems that are in the world right now. And as I said before, we're looking for that $300 billion or 300 billion barrel reserve in Venezuela, so we can stand off the very successful to this point attempt by the BRICS, but led by China and Russia and India pitching in too, to reestablish the oil markets in the world so that they're not denominated, sales are not denominated in the dollar. That will be a Rubicon for the United States of America. After that, we will have real problems managing an economic downturn of gigantic proportions.
I am glad you mentioned the national security strategy, because a lot of people are describing this as the U.S. re-entrenching, that the U.S. is withdrawing from the world, that the U.S. Has capitulated to Russia and China. I don't get the sense, by the way you described it, that that's the way you read that document.
Just a reorientation of what was the strategy before, but very imperfectly executed. And one waits to see if this will be more perfectly executed. I doubt it very seriously, certainly not under Hegseth. I mean, it's like, Jamal, it's like we put a special operator lieutenant in charge of the largest not-for-profit organization on the face of the earth. Uses more oil, for example, than Portugal. This is a conglomerate of massive proportions with $1 trillion plus annually now, and it's being run by a lieutenant.
TV host.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Staring us in the face every day.
But even if it wasn't a lieutenant.
Oh, well, he made it captain, I think.
Well, okay. Well, even if it wasn't a captain.
Yeah.
Like what does this, let's say, national security strategy give you in regards to, let's say, the Trump doctrine? Let's say this is not the Wolfowitz doctrine. Let's call it the Trump doctrine. How do you view it? I mean, you've already kind of pointed out the point of view of China. What about Russia? What about the Middle East? How do you view, how does it view these other sectors of the globe?
These other theaters will be still active, but they will be theaters that we will, and here I come back to my formulation about Israel, that we hope Israel will be able to handle, for example, in the Levant and Southwest Asia, to include Iran. And in other places, we hope other things will tie up other potential enemies. But let me add, I don't think Donald Trump, and I think he's right about this, I don't think he thinks Russia is an enemy. I think he believes, and I agree with him on this to an extent, that Russia, once energized to have good relations with America again, will be a very productive partner in those relations. And that in the course of doing that, they can at least ensure Russian neutrality, if not actual help, once we eventually take on China. So they've changed that portion of the strategy of Biden and Blinken and Sullivan. They were focused on beating Russia, then going after China. That is a change. We now are focused on China. And that is a proper geostrategic focus. And I'm not inviting war with China by saying that. I'm just recognizing reality. The country in the world that is beating us in almost every factor of national power, economic, political, you name it, military, defense industrial base, Navy, Army, you name it, is China. Now, Russia has become a true competitor in that fray, should it begin, because we've allowed them to battle harden. We've produced a situation in Ukraine that allowed them to have a battle-hardened military, probably one of the best in the world right now, with a equivalent defense industrial base. And oh, by the way, at the same time, GDP growth and a functioning sound economy despite oil sales and despite the war. So we have forced Russia into a realm where she can be pretty independent, really. And one of the things that we should be trying to do is to peel Russia away, at least into neutrality, from China, if we're serious about taking China on. And again, I don't necessarily mean war, but I mean competing on a very strong basis and maybe doing something about the inequivalency between us right now, because China's winning all across the board. China's winning. And if we want to change that, we've got to change our attitude. And this strategy purports to do that. What I'm worried about is what I see in this strategy is more pork barrel, like the Golden Dome, for example, like the buildup of the Navy, the beautiful Navy that Trump's going to build and so forth. What I see there is pork barrel politics, because nothing is being done to rein in these defense contractors who will salivate at the prospects for the Golden Dome and the Golden Fleet and everything else Trump wants to do, but they won't build it, or they'll build it badly.
Yeah,
that's not what China does. China builds well. So if you're going to build a Navy to compete with China's, if you're going to build anything militarily to compete with China, not to even mention the economy, you've got to change the whole way you're building things. You're building sorry weapons at maximum costs and overruns and time delays, as Hegseth has recognized, that simply won't compete with China. China can build one ship a month. We can't build one a year.
Yeah, I get the sense that China's strategy boiled down to time. We need time. Effectively, we need to be able to outbuild, out industrial capacity, et cetera, the United States. And at a certain point, our military will be to the point where the U.S. would back off. And this document, on some level, is the culmination of that, at least temporarily, backing off, with the United States recognizing that this is not the time to take China on directly.
At least I could be wrong. Yeah, that's sort of a message in the strategy, though it's not apparent that they understand that might be quite an interregnum. It ain't going to happen tomorrow. It ain't going to happen on Trump's administration either. What worries me about it is it seems to me it's a fait accompli to them. And here I could quote John Mearsheimer. I mean, John Mearsheimer would probably agree with him. And I like John. He's normally right. But I don't think war with China is inevitable. This seems to say it is. And it seems to say, we know it is. We need a little time to rearm and refit and rest up, and then we'll have it. And my projection there is the only way you're going to have it is you're going to have a nuclear war, because you're going to lose in the opening stages, and those losses will be so traumatic for the American people. Think about, for example, 4 aircraft carriers in 30 days on the bottom of the ocean. That's about 20,000 people dead or in the water drowning. That's the kind of trauma we're going to have when the conventional phase of this conflict starts. Can we stand that? No, we will go to nuclear weapons. And that's what the evolution of any kind of war like this, no matter how much, as John says, it is going to happen, is that we go to nuclear war. And I don't think that's a good thing for anyone.
Well, this is Thucydides' gap, basically.
Yeah.
A rising power taking on an established power, and these two inevitably go into conflict. Hopefully, the hope is that this just remains economic. From your mouth to God's ears. Yeah.
Yeah, we hope it remains philosophic and not real.
Yeah. because I don't know how this doesn't become a nuclear war. And I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's like people who are making these arguments that we can win a nuclear war.
There are.
That's mental.
There are. And the more we allow the scientists at places like Los Alamos and Jet Propulsion Laboratory and a host of other labs where they're working on these things. These scientists are young people, basically. I'd say in the 40 to 50 range. They're not from the Manhattan Project. They don't, other than reading about it, they have no experience with the Manhattan Project or actual hands-on the systems that were developed. They are the kind of people that we lust after in industry. They are making every day revolutionary steps with regard to nuclear weapons. They are designing new nuclear weapons. And what's happening on the other side of that equation, if you will, in the Pentagon amongst the general and flag officers in general, is you have people who are developing this attitude along with these youngsters in the labs, developing the weapon systems and the technology to make them even better and better. You have these people merging in the idea that you could win a nuclear war. We've never had a real strong body of people. We've had people on both sides, civilian and military, who thought that these were just bigger weapons, bigger cap guns, if you will, and that you could use them. I'm hearing today, and I'm listening to too often, this idea that if we keep going on the technological road we're on right now, we're going to be at a point in the future where we could launch a first strike, then ride out whatever's residual in the country we launch it against, probably China and Russia, and survive. I think that's nonsense, but I may be wrong. Technology has surprised me a number of times in my 80 years on this earth. Maybe these people are developing something, but then you got to ask yourself the moral, the ethical question. Would you want to do that even if you had the capacity to launch a first strike, ride out whatever was left in the country you launched it against, or countries, plural, and then afterwards live with yourself? I mean, that's a huge question. But look at what we're doing right now. We're killing over 80 people without any due process, any law on the high seas, just killing them because we can. So doesn't that extrapolate into the thought in the future that we could launch a first strike and get away with it and live with it afterward?
Last question on this one. Is it possible for a U.S. president to accept a deal from the Russians in this way? I don't get the sense that it is. I mean, like, whatever Donald Trump wants, I get the sense that Trump wants a deal, but he wants a deal in American terms. Russia is never going to accept a deal in American terms, which seems like the war just continues.
What are American terms, though, now? Tell me what American terms are right now. The terms are essentially Zelensky gone, Ukraine not fighting anymore, bombs not dropping, drones not flying, nuclear plants not being struck on either side, and a rump Ukraine that probably is going to be missing Odessa if we wait another month or two, and will not have a commercial port and access to the Black Sea. I don't see anything other than that happening, and Trump is rid of it. He's through with it. He doesn't want any more of it, and I don't blame him.
Well, security guarantees are fail. This idea that they're going to steal Russian money and use that Russian money in order to enrich Trump, that's going to be a fail. I mean, there are a few elements of this plan that are just non-starters.
And the Europeans are going to throw every monkey wrench they can in it. But I think they're not long for this world. The leaders that are doing it right now are not long for this world. And then the confusion after the new leaders come in is going to be real turmoil, and the future of Europe is going to be at least initially decided there. And I'm very, very, very concerned about how those decisions are made, because I think chaos is more likely the future for Europe than unity.
Well, the Russians are expecting a war. I mean, they seem to be gearing up for a war in Europe.
I think that goes away pretty much, though, the moment some sort of cessation of hostilities in Ukraine occurs, and it's clear the United States is not going to back Europe in any effort at all.
Okay.
And I think that's Trump's intent, ultimately. I think even more importantly, it's the billionaires in the shadows behind him intent.
Like Kirill Dmitriev.
The deep
Steve.
state, we call it
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
So you think there's going to be a negotiated settlement ultimately to end this?
I do. And I think the negotiated settlement is going to be between the United States and Moscow. I don't think there are going to be Europeans in there except kicking and screaming.
Interesting. We will see. We will see. I am very maybe I've gotten jaded in watching all of this. But
easy to get that way.
yeah, I just have a hard time seeing a U.S. president, especially Trump, accepting terms that the Russians are effectively going to lay down.
It won't be billed that way. You can rest assured of that. Just like Heather Cox Richardson, as I was saying, pointed out this morning. On the 3rd, he says A, and then on the 8th, he said, I didn't say A. That's Donald Trump. You better believe he'll shape this in his own image, as it were. It'll be a golden agreement.
Colonel, you have my appreciation for this breakdown. I swear to God, you do. Thank you for this. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He is former distinguished visiting professor of the government and public policy at College of William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught 6 years at the University Honors Program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known, as retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff for United States Secretary of State, Colin Powell. You have a good day, man. Thank you for this. Be safe, okay?
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shout out to Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Always a great breakdown. He's always has my appreciation for joining me. I suppose we will see. Obviously, we have difference of points of view on this channel in regards to how this ends. You have some people with the point of view that this ends in a deal. You have other people with a point of view that there is no way for a U.S. president to make that deal. I think it will be hard pressed for a U.S. president to make a deal. I just think it is. But I could be wrong. And I accept, obviously, we're talking about future events. So all of these things are just predictions. We don't necessarily know. Not to mention, how do you trust whatever the U.S. puts on paper, right? There's that too. So we will see. But we have come to the end. We've come to the end. Let me go to the chat real quick. We have one chat. Black Spock. Love Jerry. He's a great guest. He is a great guest. Jerry Gray. Jerry Gray is a fantastic guest. So is David Hundeyin, and so is Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. All of them are fantastic guests. Maybe my title sucked, which is why we didn't get more people. But either way, it was a damn good show in regards to the people that we've had on the show and the interviews themselves. So hopefully when we cut these, it will do better. But no, he's a great guest. He's a very good guest. And David gave a fantastic breakdown. Lawrence Wilkerson, as always, gave a fantastic breakdown. Look, I'm going to say like this video. It helps in the algorithm. Share this video. It helps in the algorithm. Leave a comment if you want to leave a comment. You can always support, especially if you find yourself coming back here often to this channel. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, Super Sticker, memberships, all of these things help support the content. All of these things help support the show. You have my deepest appreciation for it. YouTube demonetizes these videos at any random moment. So your support helps the show keep ticking along. Definitely subscribe if you haven't subscribed and you find yourself coming back here often into the show. And I think that's it. All right. You guys stay awesome. Be safe. Be kind to the degree that you can be kind. And I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good one all. Be safe.